Good morning, everybody. So good morning. Thank you, everybody. I know some of you have been here for the last hour or so. We've been doing some networking to get ready for today's session. My name is Michael Scalgin. For those of you who don't know me, I'll be the MC for today, so I'll be guiding you through the whole wonderful program that has been pulled together for our 2024 Faith and Welcoming Communities Forum. Let's have a round of applause for the forum and for everybody here. I want to say that I love this event. I love being here either as a participant or when I'm fortunate enough to be able to MC the event. Really the whole theme here for many of you I know are from a lot of agencies working to help newcomers and settlement services, as well as faith communities are here. And I have to say that I'm on both sides of the dialogue here for today. For the last 25 years, I've been doing lots of work supporting nonprofit organizations who are working with vulnerable populations, but also a member of the faith sector, a former Buddhist monk many years ago, for those of you who know me, as well as working on doing a lot of work with familiar faces in the room here, supporting interfaith dialogue. I also want to say I'm really happy to see as well that we have our community safety partners at our discussion today. I think 31 Division, if you want to stand up, is represented. Speaking with Colin a little earlier. For many of you who don't know, police services have been doing some great work to really improve neighborhood relationships and partnerships. So great to see them here today. And also community safety is a topic near and dear to my heart as well. So happy to see all of that happening today. Great. So without further ado, actually, before I move to our next speaker, I just want to say that we do have a wall with some paper, I guess, up on the wall there. And we're really hoping that this will be an interactive activity throughout the day. We might check in with that whiteboard. But I do encourage you to put up any kind of responses you may have to the question, what does collaboration mean to you? Right? And so we want to see that. I think you have some sticky notes on your table, but if you don't have any, we'll let the conference organizers know. The sticky notes are over here by the whiteboard, it sounds like, so you can grab them on the table over there beside our community safety partners. Okay, wonderful. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you the Toronto North LIP manager, who is Serna Stambuk, and she's here this morning.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for pronouncing my name so well. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. It's wonderful to see you all this morning at the Black Creek Pioneer Village, and we're so grateful for this awesome sound system. So, as Michael said, my name is Serna, which in my language, in the Southern Slavs, means a deer, a doe, a female deer. I was named by my grandmother. And my ancestors come from the Balkan Peninsula, which for centuries has been a place of migrations and movements of nations. This forum is our large annual event organized by Toronto Local Immigration Partnerships and led by the Toronto North LIP as a way to address the gaps which we identified in collaboration between the settlement sector and the faith communities. We know that the faith communities are one of the main sources of support, practical, emotional, spiritual, to newcomers to Canada. And in fact, 63% of all newcomers to Canada make use of this type of support in the early years of coming to this country. And so this has been never more obvious than in the last year. And this makes this forum all the more special and important this year. Before we start, we would like to remind everybody that the purpose of this event is for us all to come together, to work together across faiths, across cultures, across political lines, to share resources, build relationships, and build collaboration to address issues facing newcomers in Toronto, those who are just arriving and those who are already here. We ask that you let this focus guide your discussions today, although we know that there are many pressing issues in the world and that many of us carry difficult personal realities as a result. We encourage you to take care of yourself today, and please reach out to any of the members of the event planning team if you need throughout the day. So if I can get the planning team to please stand up or wave if you're not already standing. So just stand up and wave so folks know who the amazing, they're always so shy. on the day off, but so fearless and hardworking leading up to the event. Please take a moment to have a look at the contents of the folders on the table. You will find today's agenda, as well as all the speakers' bios and the descriptions of the afternoon workshops. The workshops will be held here for those of you with the blue dot. Can I get somebody to nod their head to confirm that that's correct? Okay, so if you have a blue dot, you will be staying here in the afternoon. But if you have a green or a red dot, you will be moving to the visitor center for the afternoon for that 1 hour of the workshops. And we will have folks to direct you to the visitor center. And then you will be coming back here. The workshops will start after lunch. So we ask you to please come back here to this pavilion after lunch so that we can appropriately direct you to the workshop location. The event is being live streamed as well, but we are so happy to have so many of you here in person today. And I would also like to ask that at any point during the event, you scan the QR code that is going to be present on every slide of the PowerPoint. That is the link to our evaluation. We don't have paper evaluations this year. We would like you to please, at any point, we'll remind you during the event, just scan that QR code and give us some feedback on the event. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Kat Krieger, our indigenous tradition, who is an indigenous traditional teacher, knowledge keeper, and philosopher. He's from the Cayuga Nation, Turtle Clan, as well as having German and English ancestry. Kat was taught traditional ceremonies, teachings, circles, counseling, healing, and plant medicines, indigenous philosophies, and pedagogies by an Anishinaabe elder, and he uses these gifts to help all people. Kat has worked as an elder and advisor in many indigenous agencies, government ministries, non-profit organizations, and corporations. He's retired from the University of Toronto, where he last held the position of Indigenous Advisor within the Offices of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the Mississauga campus. Kat served as part of the chaplaincy for the Pan Am and Invictus Games in Toronto, providing Indigenous support to athletes. Kat remains active as a guest speaker, lecturer, and consultant in curriculum development, cultural competency, and Indigenous perspectives of wellness, and he's part of the Peel Police's Indigenous Circle and Chiefs Resource Council. So welcome, Kat. I also will read the territory acknowledgements before we start with your words, but before that, I would like to offer you this gift of tobacco for the words you're about to speak. So before Kat starts, I would like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And that this land is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The territories are currently covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties signed with the multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. We are eternally grateful for Indigenous stewardships of these lands and waters. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here to support my Indigenous friend and colleague, my fellow chaplain as well from the UFT as well. And I would invite other faith leaders to come over here to support him. It is for this non-religious ceremony. So you're welcome to come on the stage to support.
What we're going to do at the start is have a traditional smudge, and I'll explain that, of course. It's the lighting of some white buffalo sage, and we always extend the invitation to almost anyone that wants to join us. Traditionally, we would go to every single person, but I think today we might need a bushel of sage to do that. So, as he mentioned, if you wish to come on stage and join us for this bit of the ceremony, you're welcome to. You're not obliged, anyone absolutely not.
Not just faith leaders,
anyone at all who wants to join us. So there's no dishonor in not doing that. I won't hold it against anyone, but it is a moment to ground ourselves and For those of you who stay at the tables and sit and watch, it also reaches out to you. So there's such a connection there. So we'll be just a sec. You're all welcome to sit again. You're welcome. So, first off, I want to say thanks to all of you for being here today, for joining in on this, for this gathering, this coming together. Traditionally, as many Indigenous people, and I want to be clear right away, I can't speak for all the Indigenous nations across this Turtle Island. We all have different ways of doing things, different ways of smudging, different ways of doing ceremonies, different ways of greeting. But I'll do the best I can with what I know and what I've been brought up with. The smudge itself, that's a moment to relax, and every one of the cultures sitting here in this room, at some place, some point, we all discovered fire. And fire became one of the central things that was essential for survival. It was the thing we gathered around late at night to talk and philosophize, if that's a word. It's that warmth that brings to us. There's a connection to the sun, to the fire that burns at the heart in each and every one of us. So it's something that's just a way of coming together. Oh, that's cool. Kind of like that. So that way of coming together is kind of why we're here today. Come together in a good way, and that smudge itself, that taking of the smoke over the head, the eyes, the brain, the heart, breathing a little bit in, and it's almost an essential way to be. And it doesn't need to be this, it can be however you do it. But the idea is whatever we say today, we're going to say from the heart, we're going to speak from the heart, we're going to touch things with our heart, we're going to think with our heart, we're going to be here with our heart. And I was once asked at the university why I never spoke from notes, and I said, well, if you know what you're doing, if you know where you're coming from, if you're speaking about something passionate that comes from the heart, when you breathe in, that air goes past your heart, it will come back out with the words that you want to say, and will come out and be received in a good way. So we put all our negativity aside, we ground ourselves. And actually one day when I was doing this, I go, it's kind of a Zen moment. And one of the Buddhist priests goes, hey, that's cultural appropriation. So I couldn't help but laugh at that, and it was done in humor. I like to hear laughter. I like to laugh. But I want to start off in an old style. Wayne Bojo, Tansi, Sego, Makwa Gishgad, Indigenous cause, Yikan Dodem, Huga, meanwhile, German English and Dao. Ambe Majado, Jibwa Bida, Ben Genege Gomi Nage Nage Goba. So Mikwech, Skobni Kwe, meanwhile, Manado Gisis, Manado Nokus, meanwhile, Kichukumi Medewa Bo, Miwi Shaganash Shishabangi. First thing, I'll translate, of course. That language is not one of my languages. It's Anishinaabe-Moan. I don't speak it very well. But one of the teachers that I spent so many years with was Anishinaabe. He was from a different nation. I'm Haudenosaunee, part of the Six Nations Confederacy, the Dish with One Spoon, the Wampum Agreements. And that in itself is a combination of 6 different nations coming together probably about 1,000 years ago. Remember the eclipse that just happened? Well, about 1,000 and a bit years ago, there was also another eclipse. The totality fell across the same land as it did with this one. When that totality swept across, there was the final agreements to come together as 6 nations, cease conflicts, and live together the best we could in peace and harmony. Share all the resources around us in a good way, and ensure that enough was left for the next 7 generations to come. So these are almost combined teachings. The words themselves, they kind of loosely translate into, and again, I apologize because I don't speak it very well, I don't pronounce it very well, but I have to remember my elder. It's almost like if you went to university, you had to have little footnotes, etc. That was my footnote to that elder. That was my acknowledgement. My spirit name is Makwagishgat, which means like one of the big black bears up north, either from the sky or from the sun or in the sun. That was given to me by a Anishinaabe elder, which I appreciated. The clan affiliation for me happens to be Turtle Clan. That comes down through my father, through my grandmother, through my great-grandmother, and I actually have their original birth certificates stating who and what they are and where they're from. So that's a little bit of my ancestors. And if we go up to what is now upstate New York, where the bear clawed the land, if you Google that area and see Cayuga Lake, you'll see what I mean. Looks like big claw marks on the land. There's several lakes there. Or if we go over to Cayuga, which is near Bradford, south of Hamilton, kind of southwest of there. So these are the lands that my ancestors come from on my dad's side. If we go across the big water to where England is, down to the southwest part of that, and even cross the other bit of water into what is the southeast of Germany, on my mom's side, that's where my ancestors come from. And I acknowledge this mix of DNAs within myself and honor all my ancestors. That's important to me. So we gather like this, we say those words, we speak our greetings, we look at each other with our heart, and we welcome people into our heart. The first part of the words talk about the sun crossing the sky, and anybody that's heard me speak before at one of these gatherings almost knows what I'm going to say. That sun is giving us our original instructions, or reminding us, or being a mnemonic, however you want to look at it. This is a way to walk through life. Bring warmth, bring light, and bring life to everything around you. And our belief systems say that somewhere in our belief systems that's braided into it. Walk through life in a good way. Help people, bring life, bring warmth. It also talks about the moon doing symbiotic dance with the sun and softening the light to silver to remind us of the hair of our ancestors and that she is always watching over us, always has the same face towards earth. And I know we can equate that to various ways from above, if you would, that ethereal place, someone is watching over us. So it's a beautiful thing, it's a comforting thing. The big water to the south of us, how it's essential for life. So in this area, I always talk about Lake Ontario, because that's kind of the big water to the south of us. It is essential for life. And within a lot of the indigenous belief systems, it is considered a gift from the women. We're introduced to that when we spend 9 months in the womb. We also receive the gift of music there. But we spend 9 months in that womb. Our physical creation, we owe to the women. And the Haudenosaunee people is mostly a matrilineal society. We look to the women to choose who will speak. A lot of that's disrupted over the years of colonization, but for the most part, that's an important thing. And it talks about recognizing where we come from, recognizing our original way of being, recognizing what and who we are. So when we come together like this and we share these words, we share a bit of fire, a bit of smudge. We look into our hearts to begin our day, and with all the people here, I am a world traveler. I did not grow up in a particular place or a particular community, but I'm also grateful for the chance to meet so many people. Even the winged ones are coming to join us today. It's amazing. So those words, with that smudge, with that gathering, with reaching out to one another, let's have a beautiful day of touching our hearts, sharing words and sharing gifts. So, miigwech for listening to me.
Miigwech Kat, thanks for being here this morning to set the tone for us and really, I guess, in a way, help us to set our intention for our discussions today, as well as getting the right vibration in the area. Thank you so much. At this time, I'll introduce our speaker who will provide opening remarks. That will be Pastor Eddie Jumba. Pastor Eddie, are you here? There you are. If you want to come up while I'm reading your bio here, I'll just give a short excerpt from his bio. Pastor Eddie is the senior pastor of Milliken Church in Markham, also a psychotherapist at New Ways Center for Wellbeing, and president of House of Hope Shelter, where he coordinates the efforts of refugees and asylum seekers, a unified settlement process, and to build a 500-bed shelter for the homeless. So please put your hands together to welcome Pastor Eddie.
Good morning and welcome to this very special day. I have to say, when I received the invitation, first of all, my name is Eddie. That's where I need to start. My name is Eddie, and I bring you greetings from my family, my biological family, and my church family. I belong to two church families. One is Milliken Wesleyan Church in Markham, located right across the Pacific Mall, and the other family is Dominion Church, where many of you came to know about me because of the work that was being done and continues to be done out of there. So I bring you greetings from those two families that I belong to and the entire African village. I have to say, when I received the invitation, there were many beautiful words in the invitation, but something that captivated me was the word healing together in times of crisis. Healing together in times of crisis. Many years ago, when I was being sharpened as a chaplain, one of the things that I learned that forever changed how I look at helping was something that they called cultural humility. Cultural humility is the effort to first of all acknowledge that you can never be competent in another person's culture. You just cannot. But also, it is also the acknowledgement that with some effort, you can learn a thing or two about others' culture as you attempt to help them. This video tells that in 1 minute, and if there's sound, I would request to play it now, nice and loud.
There was once a valley with a mighty river running through it, and every few years the rains would fall much heavier than usual, and the river would flood, filling mile after mile of its floodplain in the valley bottom. As the floodwaters rose, everything that could run would run from the valley. Everything that could fly would fly out of the valley. Everything that could crawl would crawl out of the valley bottom, and everything that would climb out of the reach of the rising flood. A monkey sat on a branch of a tree just above the water and stared down into the rushing torrent. As he looked, he saw a mighty fish struggling in the tide just below where he sat, flicking its tail furiously just to keep from being washed away. The monkey, watching the fish struggle, felt compassion for the fish, and reaching down, he scooped the fish out of the water and placed it safe in the top of the tree, where, to the monkey's dismay, that was the end of the fish.
Very much. I want to draw your attention to the question: if you were the fish or the friends of the fish, and you had opportunity to speak some words to Mr. Monkey, what would you say to Mr. Monkey? Or if you were the other family member of Monkey, and now you come to Monkey and what Monkey has just done, what would you say to Monkey? I want to invite you, as you reflect on the crisis, that has just, for me, unfolded. It has just unfolded when I look at what we have done and what we are anticipating to do in terms of the numbers of refugees coming to this beautiful country. I think there are many good reasons to conclude that the work has just started. So as a way of opening this time, our time here together, and I feel it has already been opened when my senior brother who stood here said, we are going to think with our heart this morning, or this time that we're going to be spending here. So I want to invite you and to encourage you that first of all, you're doing the right thing if you care to help. Now, a next level to that right thing would be to care to hear from the person who is on the receiving end of that hope, to hear from them what hope looks like. So when they get to define what hope looks like, then you are at the next level of helping, because at this point, you are not helping for your own sake, but you're helping because you know exactly what they have defined as help. And when we do that, we are culturally humble. When we do that, we are putting the interest of the person we are helping above our education, above our interests, above anything, even above our passion. Remember, Monkey was helping out of passion. Monkey's intent was not impure, it was pure. But when we take the time to listen to the person we are helping, we go above just the helping to do something that many in the helping profession always miss. And I want to encourage you, the numbers are big, the burden sometimes looks heavier than what you can carry, but as the other, I don't know if you're familiar with the starfish story, even the one starfish or even the one person you help, you have made a difference in the world of that person. God bless you. I look forward to interaction with you.
Thank you, Pastor Eddie. Now we're going to do a little bit of activity here for some networking. So this is going to call on all of you to stand up, actually. We're all going to gather, and we're going to go out to this green space right behind us, and I'll ask if you can all gather facing the pavilion. And we'll do a little bit of, this is as interactive as it will get for you all today. So please bear with us. We'll get this out of the way this morning. But please follow everybody, get up. We're going to do about 10 minutes of networking on the green space. See you all out there.
Can you guys hear me okay? Quickly for everybody, you can see Serna in the middle. If you can imagine a line along this grass, because this exercise we're calling something about crossing the line as a part of building relationships between nonprofit agencies, faith communities, and other groups. So what we're going to do here is just a little bit of an exercise. I'm going to ask some questions, and I'm going to ask you to move either to the left, that'd be your right side, to the right side of the green space or the left side of this imaginary line, okay? So my first question is an easy one. If you have been to one of these faith forums before, please go to the right side. If this is your first faith forum, go to the left. A little bit of exercise for everybody. You don't go too far. This is, right side is over here, we'll say, and left side is over on this by the tree. Let's see. Oh, we have first timers over here. Wonderful. And you guys are veterans. You've been at these faith forums. Great. And now I will ask another question here. If you speak more than 3 languages, so I guess 4 or more languages, please move to this side, to the right of the line. If you have less than 4 languages, on this side. Can you hear me better? Oh, maybe he's teasing me. Great. So this group here has 3 or more than 3 languages, which is wonderful. And then now I'll ask a question. If you have a pet, come to this side. Yes.
If you have received support, move to the right. If you have not received support, move to the left. Wow, that's great. If you have ever felt uncomfortable revealing an aspect of your personality, stay on the right. If you have, then move to the left.
Okay. Whoops. Hello. We're almost finished, folks. Yes. I will say it a little bit louder now. So we have here, if you have aging parents, move to the right. If you do not have aging parents, move to the left. Aging parents. No parents, okay. If you have aging parents, move to the right. If you do not have aging parents, you can stay on the left here. Wonderful. Lots of us with aging parents. Now here's another easier one. If you're a morning bird, you like the mornings, like getting up early, move to the right. If you don't like mornings, if you're not a morning bird, as they say, you can go to the left. Who are the morning birds? Morning birds on the right over here. I guess Colin, you must work night shift. Do you work night shift? Yeah, you work days and nights. All right. Here's another good one. If you have ever been told that you are a good singer, stay on the right. If you have not been told that you're a good singer, maybe you weren't told you're a bad singer, but never gave you a compliment, then come to the left over here. Interesting. Not many good singers today. Okay. And the last question we'll have here is, sorry, not last question, almost last question. If you have ever received or provided settlement supports from or on behalf of a faith group, come to the right. So if you've received or provided support, settlement support from a faith group, please stay on the right. Others stay on the left. Okay. Okay, great. And the last question. If you just came here for the free food and drinks, you stay on the right side. And if you actually came here to learn and collaborate with people, come to the left. You just came for the food. Who came for the food? I want to know who that is. Who came to actually learn? Anybody? Most of us? A bit of a difference. Okay. Thanks, everybody, for indulging us on this little bit of interactive exercise. Round of applause. We got through all the tech issues, so that's great. We worked together. Let's go back and get settled in for our next speaker. Okay, we rolled with it.
Yeah, we rolled with it. You did a great job. Here, let me help you wrap this.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for the exercise out on the green space. And now we'll move to our next speaker. Just want to also mention that we are running a little bit behind schedule, so for folks not to worry too much, we're going to have lunch starting at 12:15. So we'll just hang in a little bit longer, but please enjoy the refreshments on the middle table here. I will now introduce our next keynote speaker, a longtime colleague of mine. We have Dr. Richard Landau this morning. Richard is a communications expert and professor. Put your round of applause together for him. He's going to be speaking this morning. He has really done a lot of work for many, many years around interfaith dialogue. We're really fortunate to have him here this morning. Please put your hands together for Dr. Richard Landau.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. What a lovely day, and what an excellent organization. And the people who organized the event, I will tell you, in my communication with them, they did an excellent job keeping me informed. Can you hear me now? All right. Sorry. I was thinking it was a television microphone. I always feel it's the job of a keynote speaker to identify trends that you may be dealing with in the present or in the coming year. I'll point out a couple of trends that immediately I could see. I'm not giving you answers or solutions to them. You'll probably want to discuss them in your time, but one of them is the identification of newcomers with crime. I'm not saying that's something good, but I'm saying it has been in the news, and it's something that we're all be made very well aware of. That's one of the things that we're going to be dealing with in the coming year. But I was asked to speak about faith communities and their role. And I would say that to the newcomer, you should be aware that the money is strange. The language is strange often. The government is unusual. Our customs are maybe challenging. But the one thing a faith person can pick up when they come to a new nation is contact with their faith community. The faith community serves as a haven and a place where the person who has come here feels often more at home than anywhere else. And if you haven't seen that, it's worth knowing, because I work with all sorts of people. I work as a professor with MNLCT, which is a member organization, the Mennonite New Life Center of Toronto. And I also have an organization called Speak Prep, which is about helping newcomers to prepare for careers in media and communications in Canada. And the one thing, we're a little maybe uncomfortable sometimes with the fact that it's faith, but in most of the nations of the world, faith is a fact and people are quite comfortable with it. And that's not indoctrinational faith, it's belief. We automatically think when people start talking about faith that there must be an aspect of indoctrination to it. Not necessarily. It's how people live. It identifies a critical part of their life, and what faith represents for those who have come from very difficult circumstances, it represents hope. And we know many people who are newcomers arrive in challenging circumstances. War has made refugees. Economic hardship, crime, tyrannical governments. Now the environment. There are environmental people move because they can't, there's no food where they were. People don't often relocate out of joy and pleasure. Often enough, the people that we meet have come to us because they need opportunity and they need hope. This is where faith communities can play a very important role. I want to, as I said, it will be a wide-ranging speech. So I want to introduce to you something that may change the overall flavor of your work. I don't know, raise your hand if you're familiar with Charter Section 27 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, see, it's our charter. I'm going to read it to you and think about the implications for your work, for our work, what we do. The Charter, Section 27 says the following: "This Charter shall be interpreted in a manner consistent with the preservation and enhancement of the multicultural heritage of Canadians." I'll read it again. "This Charter shall be interpreted in a manner consistent with the preservation and enhancement of the multicultural heritage of Canadians." When you think about it, it's a charter right to protect and enhance, preserve and enhance the multicultural heritage, which is what we work with. And it's a charter, it's in the charter. Nobody talks about it much. I first paid attention to it when Ujjal Dosanjh was the Premier of British Columbia, and I was in a meeting with him, and he said, "Have you read Section 27 of the Charter?" Some of you may know he was the first Sikh Premier in Canada. And I said, "No, I haven't." He said, "Take a look at it." And that was years and years ago. It was 1993. I encourage you to think about what that means for our work, the importance of our work. And lest anybody give you the idea that, well, you're just an add-on or a frill. No, you're not. The work we're doing is protected by Charter Section 27. Now, where the world's faith communities are concerned, we are in a rather unique position in Canada and indeed in Toronto. We have the opportunity to talk to each other here, and we do. And I can tell you, because my career has been based in the Toronto area, bringing faith communities together, very often to make television. We can do this. I've been to other nations. I was in Africa last year in one major center, and I spoke to the interfaith grouping there, and I said, how come there's in their case, how come there's no Muslims here? And they said, oh, well, you know, we don't know how to approach them. We don't know how to talk to them. They just don't want to show up. And I said, well, have you, when did the most recent imam move to town? Oh, 2 years ago? Did you send his wife a plant? Did you send the family a box of Turkish Delight or something? Why would we do that? There's your problem. A large part of the challenge is you have to extend yourself. And we Canadians have gained notoriety for our ability to do that. I will tell you, because I work in dialogue around the world, without an ounce of chauvinism, I will tell you that we actually do lead the world in this. We're very good at this. The Australians are good, the British are good. I will say sincerely, we are leaders in interfaith relations and interfaith dialogue. Bringing faith into the discussion shouldn't be a problem. And it's something that all of us would spend some time thinking about. The other thing that should inform our relations with faith communities is critical thinking. With any community, critical thinking. You know, because when I teach, people who've taken my courses know I never use colors like, I've heard these colors, black, red, white, and yellow, and I don't use those. I use blue, purple, green, and orange. Not that anyone is identified with any group. I got the idea from, there was a comedian by the name of Red Fox in the States, and Red Fox was on a show, said, damn it, pardon my language, damn it, if there was green people, somebody'd hate them. And he was right. So I basically say that if, you know, a group of 10 blue people go out and commit a crime, all right, blue can be anybody, is it fair to arrive at the conclusion that all blue men are criminals? No, but that's often enough how things get interpreted. 10 blue men does not make criminals, all right? And as a critical thinker, and critical thinking is now becoming more and more prevalent in teaching in schools and colleges, etc., you have to ask yourself some hard questions about what's permitted, what's appropriate. Critical thinking makes us aware of what's fair thought and what's not. So I always apply critical thinking in such situations where language, culture, and race are involved. Now, I do want to mention that while religion has a critical role to play in creating a common bond amongst us, I want to point out to you that some of you may know there's a couple of organizations I'm going to recommend that you take a look at what they're doing. One is welcomechurch.ca, and the other one is Gateway Calgary. There's some really good stuff taking place in other communities where interfaith relations and dialogue is concerned. Calgary has always been a good place. Ottawa's pretty good too, but when it comes to like extending ourselves to other people. And remember, we have a history in Canada when you're doing the intake of 1 million new people, which is going to be a challenge for all of us. When you have 1 million new people coming in, which was mentioned by the pastor previously, part of what we should remember is our success in the past. We as a nation were successful in settling with our faith community's involvement, the boat people from Vietnam in the late 70s, early 80s. The Syrian refugees, not that long ago. Earlier on, it was the Ismaili refugees from Uganda. We excel at this. We're good at this. So I just wanted to point that out to you, that we have work to do and we are good at it. All right. I was the founder of Interfaith Canada, and I'm the author of What the World Needs to Know About Interfaith Dialogue. This has afforded me an overview of the faith communities and newcomer intake organizations, and that they should work together. They're natural to work together. Bring each other into your consultation and your discussions. I believe it's now very important for faith communities and organizations that are newcomer facing to familiarize themselves with each other's work and to recognize that they're not working at opposing functions, but in similar functions. And that brings me to say the following. The collaboration between organizations of civil society and faith communities creates a bridge that both the newcomers and the nation itself needs. If we are to avoid a difficult and challenging future with 1 million new people coming, and we are to make people welcome, we need to work together. The collaboration between aid organizations and faith communities is critical. I wish you much success. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Richard Landau, for those opening keynote speaker. Thank you. And at this point, I'm going to call up our panelists. We have a panel session right now for 4 panelists. If you know who you are, please come up to the stage, and I'll introduce you in a moment. In the meantime, folks, if you're inspired by anything what you're hearing already this morning, please make sure you're going over to the whiteboard and putting up some of your thoughts on the sticky notes. So can I have Rabbi Elise Glickman, please? And Imam's coming up to the stage right now. Thank you. As well as Julie Gonsalves. Julie, are you here? And Dr. Wendy Sukier, would be great to have you up here as well. Let's take one moment for everyone to get up on the stage. So I'll do a little bit of a bio here to introduce our 4 speakers this morning. So I'll start from my right over here. So we do have with us Imam Irshad Osman. And for those of you who don't know Imam Osman, he does a lot of work at a series of GTA-based mosques, including Danforth Islamic Center, Toronto Islamic Center, and others. He also volunteers quite a bit of his time working in Toronto-based organizations, advocating for social justice, minority rights, anti-racism, and anti-hate. So please read the rest of Imam Osman's bio in your packages. Who we have next here? Is that, oops, hi. Julie? Julia, sorry about that. So we have Julia Gonsalves. Julia Gonsalves has worked with and for local communities in the Toronto nonprofit sector for over 25 years. Currently, the executive director of Warden Woods Community Center in Southwest Scarborough, and prior to this, Julia worked as director of operations at Christie Ossington Neighborhood Center, as well as the economic development manager at Canadian Women's Foundation. Also work at 519 Church Street, so very familiar with all of these community centers across the city. Excellent work that Julia has been doing for many, many years. Please put your hands together for Julia. And please put your hands together for Imam Osman. I forgot to mention that earlier after reading his bio. And then who do we have next? Wendy. Hey, Wendy. So Dr. Wendy Sukier is professor of entrepreneurship and strategy. She's founder of the Diversity Institute at Ted Rogers School of Management at the Toronto Metropolitan University. Also, a bunch of work that she has done working with partner organizations to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace, future skills, and entrepreneurship. Please put your hands together for Dr. Wendy Sukier. And last but not least, we have Rabbi Glickman, and Rabbi Glickman has grown up and done her undergraduate education here in Toronto, later ordained as a rabbi in 2004 from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. And she's done a lot of interfaith work currently with the Danforth Jewish Circle, and we're looking forward to hearing more of her experience working with asylum seekers together with other multi-faith organizations in the Danforth community. So put your hands together for Rabbi Glickman. Great, so now we're going to get a little bit of a conversation going, and I know that many of you prepared some remarks for this morning. We really want to hear, and if you can see, we've really balanced a bit of the panel to have 2 members representing the voices from faith communities and 2 people representing, if I can say, secular initiatives and engagements around social justice and immigration settlement services. So I do have some questions here, but I do want to hear from all of you a bit of your work and what you're up to. But really hoping we can have a little bit of a dialogue as we get into some of the discussion this morning. And for everybody to know, I believe we are broadcasting this on a YouTube stream, so we are going to have an opportunity after we hear a bit from the panel to also get some questions for people who are watching us or streaming us from their homes or their workplaces. So let's start with Imam Osman. Imam, I know you're doing lots of work around anti-racism and working with a number of mosques in the community. Maybe you can share with us a little bit of what you're seeing as some of the strengths of faith communities coming together to deal with anti-racism and other social issues. Really would be great to hear what your perspective is on faith groups working together, and perhaps even more importantly, how you see the Muslim community helping to sort of push forward some of those interfaith relationships. Yeah.
Thank you so much for inviting. Can you hear us?
Yeah, just speak right into the mic.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So the question is about let me introduce quickly. I am from the East End, the Danforth Islamic Center, Victoria Park and Danforth. That's the Beaches, East York area. As you know that as the keynote speaker said, that 100 million immigrants are coming to this country every year. It's quite a lot. And that means that we all have a responsibility to integrate them, support them, and to make them feel welcome, because we were there either 10 or 20 or 30 years in the same position as they are. So that's the first responsibility we have as faith communities. I as an imam, we try to inculcate that feeling of responsibility we have towards others. That supporting a stranger is part of faith, every faith community. Now, interestingly, when we talk about the racism, anti-racism, anti-immigrant sentiment, it is not just a one sentiment. It's a big industry. For an example, Islamophobia industry is almost about $200 to $500 million strong. That means almost about a day, $273,000 are spent on creating fear and about the Muslims in the country. So we have to think that how to counter that. Is it enough for us to come once a year to counter these kind of things, or maybe run a program once a month or twice a month? Is it not enough? So I will give an example of what we have done through Danforth Islamic Center. So not only by collaborating with other interfaith partners, what we did was, and we also brought in unionized union groups, because they have been the stalwarts of social justice movement since the 50s. So what can we learn from them? So we started something called Toronto East Anti-Hate Mobilization. These people we have been, although nothing is happening in the world at that moment, we have been meeting almost every month and every week to think about what is in the pipeline, what is coming. So when the truck convoy happened, we are already prepared to have a counter rally. We are already prepared what is their plan, what is their strategy, how to move forward, and how to bring together people. So this is one of the lessons I learned in my work, is that you have to be prepared every second and keep it ready, as when something goes wrong or geopolitical issues comes up, we are ready to move forward. As we know that during COVID, there's anti-Asian racism. We never expected, but this group was already ready because we knew that these kind of things are coming in the pipeline. As well as I also want to give an example of the Islamophobia and anti-Semitism moving from hate to hope, which we started with some of the Jewish leaders, because the Jewish community went through the same issues with the Muslim community is facing now. So what can we learn from them instead of building everything from the scratch? So that is also part of the leadership committee we have been working on. So now, as I mentioned, that is not only the faith communities, even the social service organization, community organizations, as well as union labor organizations, everybody has to come together to counter this narrative, then only we'll be very effective and successful. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yes, please, round of applause for Imam. Rabbi Glickman, I know you're working in East Toronto area as well, and just wondering if you might have some thoughts to share on efforts that you've done to tackle sort of the polarizing issues sometimes in faith communities, and what are the keys of strategies of bringing faith communities to work more closely together despite or sometimes in spite of our differences? Oh, just pass that one over.
All right. Oh, this one also?
Yeah, just
Hello.
talk right into it.
That one goes first.
Is this? Yes. Okay. Hi, everyone. So yes, I serve as the rabbi and spiritual leader of the Danforth Jewish Circle, which is a progressive, liberal, egalitarian synagogue on the Danforth, which is in the east end of the city. We are so blessed to be housed and share the space with two other faith groups, East End United and Neighborhood Universalist Unitarian Congregation. And together, in our building at 310 Danforth, we are known as the Danforth Multi-Faith Commons. Now, when my synagogue was started 27 years ago, the founders had two very strong beliefs that they would never give up on. One was we will never have our own building, so yes, still a shared building space with other partners. And we will never have a rabbi, they said. So, well, one of two. So they grew and we grew, and I'm the synagogue's second rabbi. So my new friend, the imam here, has already spoken a little bit about what it means to be on the east side. So we have a couple things that are going on. One, as I mentioned, we have this internal building of the Danforth Multi-Faith Commons with 2 other faith groups. But larger than that, and looking even more towards the East End, we're part of the East Toronto Multi-Faith Community, or depending on who you ask, the East Toronto Multi-Faith Committee. They are internally even unsure about which one they are. Are they a committee or are they a community? I would like to say that they are both. And we have done lots of work over the years, and what has been successful is early on, when this group was founded in 2006 and the first gathering really happened in 2008, there was a lot of scaffolding that happened about relationship building. It was about breaking bread together, and it was about learning to really know and trust one another. Maybe, as you said, dear moderator, in spite of, because of differences both religiously, culturally, socioeconomically. And so, when we had big explosions of issues like the Tree of Life Synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, and then I think a year later, the mosque shootings in Christchurch, New Zealand, each of our respective communities was able to come together and form literal rings of peace around each other's buildings and communities. And that could have only happened because of the work that we all put in since early 2006, 2007, with peace walks and coming together, a lot of laughing together, a lot of eating together, and a lot of really seeing the humanity in one another.
Thank you, Rabbi. So wonderful words this morning. Yes, we've heard from Rabbi and the Imam. I think many of us who've been a part of interfaith work for decades, really seeing the evolution where we spent so much time breaking bread, as the sort of Judeo-Christian saying goes, breaking bread together, really efforts to get to know each other. And where has that come decades later to be prepared that now we built those relationships, not stopping there. Sometimes we think interfaith dialogue is just getting to know each other, and it is a success to have us all at the same table and breaking bread together. But how are we getting more involved than to use that as the foundation for getting engaged together to deal with social issues in the world? Wonderful to hear that from you all. Now, Julia, you worked at many meaningful community centers and hubs across the city. I know a lot of the ones that I mentioned in your bio. I'm curious if you could expand a little bit on the work at Warden Woods. I understand there's a lot of work there with asylum seekers. It'd be great to hear how that work got started and any obstacles you overcame and how you did that. Yeah.
That is a many-part question. Okay.
Yes.
Oh my. I want to start a little personally just to tell you that my parents immigrated here from Guyana and from Italy, and I was raised in a very Catholic household, and as a queer person, I have always had an uncomfortable relationship with faith, and a lot of queer people have this experience. And because of how I was brought up and the constraints that I felt as a queer person in a Catholic community, I spent about 20 years or more very distanced from faith-based people, from faith communities. It was like not a comfortable place for me. And I have spent a long time in the nonprofit sector in organizations that are not interested in faith and really promote themselves as secular, applying for grants and saying, no, we don't do religious activities. That we're like, there's such a removal of a lot of our sector around doing anything faith-based. And sometimes it's like required in the grant that you're not, right? So then I came to Warden Woods, and I grew up in Scarborough. I worked downtown for a long time and came back to Scarborough now as a leader of an organization that is full of faith-based people. Our community is very faith-based. Our organization is very faith-based, mostly Muslim and Christian folks. And so personally, I've been figuring out how to integrate faith with community work. Okay, there's my context. And I also want to say that we are not a settlement organization, so we don't run specific settlement services, but of course we see lots of newcomers across our programs and services. We have staff members who are lots of newcomer staff members, folks on temporary work permits. We run a shelter where we see lots of refugees nightly. And in our way, our model is a bit of a gift because newcomers are integrated in all different ways, and people have different language capacities and different cultural expectations, and you can't tell who's new and who's not in our organization. It's very, very mixed, which is beautiful in its own way. We operate in Scarborough on a site that was built as a church in 1970, and our organization has Christian roots, which have been tamped down over the years in order to qualify for different streams of funding that weren't available to religious nonprofits. Sorry, I'm jumping around my notes a little bit, but I will say that integrating people's faith with community service work is not easy, and it's not simple. LGBT inclusion is an issue. How we handle holidays is an issue. How we handle grief. We had a young person in our community. He was shot and killed a week ago. A newcomer young person who lived in TCHC near our community center. And even us trying to figure out with their family what was appropriate to do after the death of this person. There were needs for a Muslim response, there were needs for a Christian response, there was needs for a secular response. So it wasn't simple, and it's not a matter of saying everybody can do what they need to do, because some of those things actually contradict each other. You know, pictures, no pictures, flowers, no flowers. There were things that actually could cancel each other out. But I also, I think I really feel that it's important that we allow faith to be open and allowed in our workplace, and that staff members feel like they can bring their whole selves, including their faith and including other aspects of their identity, to their work, and that folks are allowed to express that they want to pray for their coworker in a meeting, and that's okay. So we're trying to find a way to make room for faith, while also understanding there are restrictions around how we offer services that can't come from an explicit faith perspective, but that people don't drop their faith when they come to work, and neither do our community members. Maybe I'll stop there.
Okay, great. We'll have some more questions. Yeah, thank you for that response. With round of applause. Great. And we'll move to Dr. Wendy Souquier. Dr. Souquier, you're working a lot at the Diversity Institute and Future Skills Center. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work there, and probably a little bit more we'd like to hear around the economic integration aspect of for newcomers and their work around sort of better integration into society through employment. Thank you.
Sure. I just following suit, it's maybe helpful if I situate myself a little bit. So you were all asked the question about who's born outside of Canada. Can you put up your hands again? And how many people have parents who were born outside of Canada, one or the other? Keep your hands up, everybody. So that's who I am. My father was a Holocaust survivor and married my mother, who was a small town Ontario Christian. And he died when I was just before my 10th birthday, in part because of, severe mental health issues as a result of his experience, not being able to find a job, et cetera, et cetera. And they used to call my mother the convertible because she was born Protestant. She converted to Judaism after she married my father. Then she dated a Unitarian for a couple of years and was very involved in the humanist movement, and ended up as a Catholic when she married my stepfather. What was interesting about my mother is her faith was not tied to the religious structures. So she said the same prayers every night, regardless of which denomination or sector she was part of. And she used to have a list of people she would ask God to bless. And Lord help you if you did something wrong, because you'd get dropped off my mom's list. So when she suddenly became ill and was in hospital, and she was a Catholic and had a very good relationship with her priest. And I remember one of those sort of traveling ministers came to console her because it was clear she was dying. And afterwards she said, "I didn't really like him. He wasn't very smart. I want to talk to Rabbi Baskin." And so even though she had not been in a synagogue for 40 years or whatever, I went to the payphone and called up Rabbi Baskin, who I hadn't talked to.
I knew him. He was smart.
He was very smart. Called him up, and he came and, met with my mom. And then when we were organizing her funeral, the priest allowed Rabbi Baskin to come to the Catholic Church in small town St. Catharines and read the Kaddish. So I grew up in a very interfaith kind of family. We really need to work together to ensure that when we have refugees, asylum seekers, newcomers in Canada, we give them opportunities for employment if that's what they want, because there's such a strong connection between integration and employment, education and employment, but also, frankly, employment and mental health, especially for men. And I say that based on the research, but also based on my own experience. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Lots of great pieces there in your response, Doctor. I'd love to hear from the voices of the faith leaders at the table. A lot of what you shared about the integration of newcomers, especially in the workplace, and a lot of these sort of issues that are untapped. Curious to hear Imam first and then the Rabbi. It'd be great to hear a bit about any of the issues really that Dr. Wendy Sukir has touched on, but even more importantly, I'm thinking, you mentioned something really specific there about a gentleman who was easier to acknowledge his addictions rather than his faith identity. Imam, any thoughts about
where you're seeing this sort of fear or reluctance for people to identify as a faith person, or maybe a particular faith from Islam, if you want to speak as well?
Okay, why don't I start with my own example? When I first came to Canada 20 years ago, I started my work as a fundraiser at United Way Toronto. And there too, every Friday, thank God it's Friday, was a TGIF. So it's a new word for me, and they will always go for bar to just pub, just to socialize. I used to go. To the extent, even in Ramadan, nobody knew that I'm fasting, and there'll be lunch sessions, which I used to go. I will sit there while everybody's eating. And they will tease at me, they will taunt me, saying, "Oh, aren't you eating? This is very tasty. How about this water?" I kept on, because I was very new. I was the only Muslim employee among 160 employees at United Way at that time. I was the only Muslim fundraiser. But on a positive note, things have changed. Now, in the recent past, when I was working in the social service organizations, they will cancel all lunch meetings during Ramadan. That means awareness has been built. Now with regard to this alcohol and drinking and
etc., now I'm sitting on a lot of EDI boards, and we are trying to raise this awareness. And what is that culturally sensitive things, and how we can come together even without alcohol. And when I go to conferences, they consult us that what kind of food to keep and what kind of without alcohol is okay. Whether not only Muslim perspective, even now some South Asian communities who are coming into the space, they only have vegetarian food, right? And also the coffee is not part of the culture. Is there tea available? Wine and cheese is not part of the culture. What are the alternatives? Now the committee we have started to think, and the organizers are actually keen on trying to accommodate in various levels. So that is a positive note, but at the same time, what Dr. Yu suggested is that I remember working with Senator Ratna Amidwar in that representation board leadership in the past. It's very interesting. I mean, when I was working at United Way, I looked at that, what kind of, in each sector, the percentage was very different. In the law sector, what is the leadership level among the diverse leadership? So growing up and that level, so seeing that change in the last 2 decades, I feel encouraged. At the same time, still a long way to go. One quick plug, which is about the intergenerational trauma and intersectionality. 2 years ago, I started a program called Muslim Indigenous Connection Program, where I train about 25 Muslim youth every year to learn about the indigenous spirituality, values, worldview, as well as their past struggles and the trauma, etc. Interestingly, in my first cohort, when our Muslim youth were having conversations with indigenous elders and leaders and knowledge keepers, what they realized is that the intergenerational trauma, the indigenous community is facing is not different from what we faced before coming to Canada. So here, our story started to mesh. We understand each other's pain. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Rabbi?
Well, there's a lot to say about the history of anti-Semitism. Anecdotally, and there is some research that says that it's the oldest hatred around, and then like a pot of boiling water, it's either on a low simmer or on high peaks like a volcano erupting. And so I am the grandchild of Holocaust survivors, and there is some epigenetic research that shows that that trauma lives inside of me and my 12-year-old, and maybe even in future generations. I want to say two things. One is that I think there is an erroneous assumption that Jews all look like me, which is to say of Eastern European descent, white presenting. And then when folks meet Jews who are Jews of color, it can be a little bit challenging to square that circle in someone's head to think, oh, look, you don't look Jewish, but in fact, Jews have lived and do live all over the world. And so there is certainly more than one way to be Jewish, and certainly all the ways to look Jewish. So that's some current issues that Jews come across in society. The second is, remember when I said about the pot of boiling water, we are at an apex moment in history right now in a post-October 7th world of more and more Jews making a decision to either wear a necklace that overtly says that they're Jewish, to proudly keep their mezuzah, which is this ritual item on the doorpost of our house, and others quite afraid, hiding necklaces and taking down their mezuzot, which one doesn't normally do. Last year, a congregant of mine, I'll just share one anecdote, a congregant of mine made me a hat, a white hat, and it says in big, gorgeous blue and purple letters, Jew, J-E-W, because he and I had been talking about some dream I had had about Jewish swag and a clothing line. And so he gave this to me. A week later, October 7th happened, and I've since blogged about it and spoken about it in my community. But what do I do with this hat, right? If you see me, if I'm not wearing my kippah and I walk around on the street, you may not know, we were talking about this just before, you may not know that I am Jewish. And so what do I do with a hat that says Jew in this particular time and place? The answer is that I wear it. And the good news, I think our keynote speaker referenced this before, in Toronto and in Canada, we are doing it right. I have not once received any issues, any hatred, anything. So I can certainly speak for the neighborhood of Davisville where I live in, and on the Danforth where I work, that has been wonderful. But the thought comes into all of our minds, what about those types of things that we have that would identify us as Jewish?
Great, thank you. Julie, you mentioned earlier a little bit as well. Glad to hear your thoughts on the current conversation. You're taking some notes there. What are your thoughts on our current topic?
You want to read my notes? Well, I'm just thinking, so our community center at Warden and St. Clair is, we're working on a redevelopment plan. It's part of the Golden Mile redevelopment, and we're going to tear down our center and rebuild it, make it beautiful, state of the art, and then we're going to build housing on top because Toronto needs housing. But part of our plan is to have a multi-faith space within the community center. And when we first, like when I was in high school, we had a multi-faith space. It's just a room, and we're like, oh, this is simple. But it's not, because we're going to have to figure out, feet washing stations and other sort of parts of the room that aren't. It's not just as simple as putting a space in. And so I'm excited actually to connect with the folks on this panel and to find other folks today who are coming from faith organizations and could give us some input into what that space should look like and feel like to make sure that it's useful for the most amount of our community. That's what I'm thinking about.
Great, thank you. Just want to put a little plug as well. There's an organization called the Canadian Multi-Faith Federation. Imam Patel, if you could put your hand up. Lots of experience doing multi-faith spaces in government facilities and so on. So he's a great resource and connection there for you.
as well as many others in the room. On that same vein, I think you're asking for help from the faith communities, Julia. Wendy, if you could ask the faith communities for a need to help in the work that you're doing, what would that ask be?
There's no journalists in the room, are there? What I would say is we have a common enemy. Right-wing, white supremacists are an enemy to us all. And I think that one of the things that we have to work together on is to fight like crazy the anti-immigrant narrative that is starting to emerge, driven by, I would argue, bad research. And there's lots of economists who stood up and said, "Oh, immigrants, oh, they're taking all the housing." It reminds me of things that come to a bad end. Oh, immigrants taking jobs. Oh, immigrants the cause of. Oh, these people causing that. And so I'm not an economist, but what I did was I got an economist and I said, "Morley, this doesn't make any sense to me because they're saying immigrants are taking all the housing, but they're the ones building the houses. So how does this work?" So we're working really hard to get evidence, data to counter the narrative, because the reality is the population in Canada is aging. The boomers like me are, retiring, dying. I want to do the first before I do the second. Some days it's not clear. And even if you have no commitment to social justice, values, what is good and right, Canada needs immigrants to survive. And it's a global competition. Japan is crashing and burning in some ways because they've had historically anti-immigrant policies. They don't have the workforce they need for the jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a very strong business case around the need to keep our economy going that will always rest on immigration, regardless of who the politicians are. But the rhetoric that we are seeing in mainstream media is having a profound and terrible effect. So for the first time in about 20 years, when asked the question, are there too many immigrants in Canada? The percentage of Canadians that say yes and the percentage of Canadians that say no are almost the same. And that's purely a function of misinformation and the absence of an assertive pushback. So I would say for me, that's the number one priority, because once that genie's out of the bottle and people start talking about those people are our problem, those people, you can't get it back in. So I'm going to give you three things. So I think that's one thing that's really critical. The second thing is, I sponsored one Vietnamese family, then I think we're up to about 300 Syrian families. We're working on Afghan refugees and human rights defenders and asylum seekers and so on. And one of the most powerful things for me in working on the Syrian refugee resettlement were the groups that brought together mosques and churches and synagogues. And I think that the work that the faith-based community does in terms of supporting asylum seekers and sponsoring refugees and supporting immigrants generally is absolutely fundamental, because it's that social capital, it's the networking, it's the connections that are absolutely critical. So, the second thing for me is getting people to double down on that. And the third thing for me that's really important is to be really intentional. How many people here run programs, whether it's English as a second language or employment training, all that stuff? To be super intentional, because I can tell you that there are a lot of programs that do more damage than good. There are English language programs that don't actually teach people English. They waste a lot of their time. and they can actually create more problems than they solve. There are bridging programs and skills development programs that lead nowhere. And so I think if we're working, and I'm constantly looking at programs that we offer through a very tough lens, like how many of these people actually got jobs? If we promised them that they were going to come spend time with us, we got to get them jobs. And that means we have to know what employers want. And even if we, think capitalism is evil and employers are bad or whatever it is, we have to work with employers to get people jobs if we're going to pretend that we're doing training programs. So the third thing for me is to really work hard to spend the money that is available smartly, to work together, don't duplicate programs, to really apply a systems approach to how we support newcomers, because I think working together, we can have a lot more impact. And as I've said, the evidence and my own experience shows that if we fail to help people get jobs and complete their education and learn English and so on, we are failing ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. So as we move to a bit more of a open Q&A, you'll see on the QR code on the screen here. I believe that's for all of you if you have your personal devices to access this. If you have any questions, as well as for anybody streaming this session as well, to input that. Maybe I'll just ask if someone can let me know if there are any questions coming in. I'll be happy to facilitate that piece. While we're waiting for those questions to come in, we'll keep going here. And I think that we've heard a little bit from Julia and Wendy around what some needs might be for how the faith communities can help. I'm curious, Rabbi Glickman, how would you see that? What requests would you have for the nonprofit sector, government, or even private sector to help with supporting faith community engagement in newcomer and settlement issues?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm going to say anything that hasn't already been shared this morning or at any of these annual gatherings, which is, it's exactly as you said, it's social capital, it's understanding that different organizations, whether they be faith-based or settlement-based, social service organizations, we each have our own folks, our own expertise, our own abilities, and so to not duplicate and to also do a little bit of a needs analysis for each organization and see, well, what do we have? Who are the people? What are the volunteers, legal and otherwise, that we have? And who can we look to? I'll say that in 2015, our synagogue, the Danforth Jewish Circle, started the process of supporting a family of 7 from Syria as refugees. And we worked happily with JIAS. Folks at JIAS in the room? Yes. And they benefit from being, sorry, I just have to look at my notes. They benefit from being both a sponsorship agreement holder, able to sponsor refugees in partnership with Canadians, and a settlement agency. So when our synagogue volunteers and staff needed help with some of the financial pieces, certainly liaising with the government, JIAS was a perfect organization for that. And so we could not have done the work that we did to help settle a family, but also JIAS needed our people. Right? We had lots and lots of volunteers taking people, taking our new family to get, Service Ontario, to go find a doctor, to figure out the school in the neighborhood. So really understanding in a needs-based analysis that we only are stronger together when faith-based organizations and settlement organizations or other social service organizations work together and do that happily, with no shame, right? That like, oh God, I wish I could do that, or we had that. But actually, that's why we exist, because we have all these different skills and abilities and human beings.
Great, thank you. Imam, any thoughts of what your ask would be of nonprofit, government, or private sector to work better together?
Yes, I will give a recent example. As I said that in the East End, not only the East End, you may have noticed as service providers between August last year to November, many newcomers, especially visitor visas, people with visitor visas came to the country. And then we also noticed that because of the new law about the PGWP, postgraduate work permit, The asylum seekers among international students has grown by 1,500% increase. And visitor visas, people paid so much money, came here, they're also claiming refugee status. Now, interestingly, this happened exactly during Ramadan period in April. And there are about 4 mosques. All the mosques started to see an increase in the number of people coming to break the fast, iftar. Our mosque had to suspend the iftar program because we could not accommodate so much people in our space, plus we didn't have funding. At the same time, on the opposite side, there are many non-profit organizations. I don't have to name. There are many organizations I'm working with very closely. I have done many programs bringing together the mosque and the organization together. However, in Ramadan, I advocated so many times to this organization to provide funding to give iftar, because iftar is no longer a social gathering. Muslims are coming because now it's a food need, food insecurity. That could be the only meal some people would have on the fasting month. There was a need. Still, the response I got was that we don't have funding to allocate for that kind of food. So how can we be creative? We are in the non-profit sector. I worked in the non-profit sector for a very long time. We talk about innovativeness. How can we be creative? And as the doctor said, that which program we are offering, what is the need, what's the intentional programming? Can't we just pivot certain things? Can't we advocate on behalf of these people who are going to serve us? That one food you are giving on that in Ramadan will allow them to come and seek your services. You can provide them more services. You see, that touch point, the touch point is a fundraising word, the touch point we missed. And then later on, how you have to do more work to bring them in to the services you're providing. So these are a few things which I request from all the community organizations to think about. What's the need? Because what the need you see inside your space versus what's the need the mosques are seeing is completely different, or the places of worship are seeing is different. Thank you.
So that's a great angle here, I think, from hearing about this, and it kind of relates a lot to one of the first questions I'll refer to from the Slido, is we do have a reference here about how can faith groups and community organizations work more closely together given the separation of faith and public services funding guidelines. And I think that's a bit of what you're touching on there. Is I've heard this for many decades where many faith communities say, hey, when newcomers come here, they often come to the mosques, temples, churches, synagogues first, and we meet the newcomers first. And so there's a way of providing that unique angle. However, oftentimes, I do work for government, and I know that the funding is often tricky when it comes to faith communities, and often faith communities are not eligible for applying for funding or perhaps can't access that funding. I'd be curious to hear some feedback about that thought, because that's even maybe part of the other question there of what can faith communities and agencies do to help change policy at the government to better support this work. Julia and then Wendy, any thoughts from your sectors around the funding constraints for faith communities and maybe potential partnerships to work closer together?
Yeah, so I would say in my previous organizations, like 20 plus years of applying for things, when it said no religious activity, we were like, we are so secular. It was like, get as far away as possible. But I'm like, we're not a church. It doesn't mean that you can't allow faith to exist within your programs and within your workplace. And you actually can't not have that exist because it's in people and it's in kind of what we do. And so I think that nonprofits have made the mistake of assuming that no religious activity means you have to be secular. It doesn't mean that. It just means that you can't promote a particular faith approach when you work with participants. So I think our sector can interpret it in a more open, kind of inclusive way than a lot of nonprofits do. Not that I would blame them. Like 519 has, it's a community of queer people who've had bad experiences with faith. So I get sometimes the response is understandable, but also that we can't remove faith from the work that we do or from the people that we serve. So I think we could interpret it in a way that is more inclusive as a starting point.
Great, thank you, Julia. Wendy. Yeah, applause, thank you.
I would actually argue, based on my experience, that faith-based organizations are often the most important intermediaries for newcomers, in the sense that very often newcomers have very mixed experience with institutions, but they will trust people at their local mosque or their local church. And so when we think of service delivery, I think there's a difference between, as Julia was saying, I think there's a big difference between promoting faith as one of your activities versus, for instance, having English language training at a mosque or career counseling or other forms of support. And in fact, I would argue that's really important because sometimes you develop enclaves where people are getting advice from people who may or may not actually have the information that's needed. So I think that's one thing. I think from, wearing my business professor hat, I think a lot of faith-based organizations have figured out how to navigate this structurally. So you can, I think about the Ismaili Council, for instance, that does phenomenal work. They have some of the most advanced pre-arrival training and support for refugees. They use iftar, for example, in very targeted ways to support newcomers and so on. And sometimes you can have a charitable organization, you can have the mosque, but they could have a nonprofit that works with them, either arm's length or managed, that does a lot of the work that will allow you to apply for funding for. And then the other way to do it is, an organization like mine might get government funding, but we can contract with other organizations to do service delivery. And there, as far as I know, there aren't restrictions on how that's structured as long as the organization involved in the service delivery is meeting the targets and doing what's required. So I think there are, lots of ways, if you think about the role of churches and faith-based groups as sponsorship agreement holders and so on. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's just you have to have the right structures and guardrails in place.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, lots of good tactics there as well. As you're mentioning, I think faith communities, still some are learning and understanding that you can create nonprofit status organizations. They become more, as we call FBOs, faith-based organizations, separate from your religious community. I think Christian groups and Jewish groups have been doing that for many decades, and I think a lot of newcomer traditions are still figuring out how to do that smartly. And it's great to kind of separate a bit out the religious curriculum or role as religious educators and from the more community social work we do. I want to turn our attention to one comment on the Slido chat here, and I would like to hear from all the panelists if you feel, I guess maybe if it's true or false from your perspective, but I see a comment there that says, oh, did I lose it now? Is it gone? I think it's gone. It's something, can you go up one of them? There's many more there. It was something about infrastructure. I think it was something to the point about, yeah, here there is right there. If each service is provided by one organization, it will require much more resources to create an infrastructure, to get clients and to manage them. So I think the comment there is about, if we had one organization providing each service, how that might be more difficult. I think this is sort of touching on the whole piece around collaboration or sort of siloed work or how we do that. Maybe start with you, Imam. Any thoughts on that? We'll just move across the panel.
I'll go back to my United Way example. It's not only the collaboration, it's also about providing one-stop services, right? And we know that we talked about social determinants of health during that time. That's a new coined term, I believe that even the 10, 15 years ago. So when somebody comes to one organization, they are not expecting to receive only one service. There could be other needs they have. So that's when our former resident, Frances Lankin, former MPP, she started this idea of creating hubs, one-stop service hubs, and about 12 of them were built around the city. So I would like to, as much as it sounds very nice, so it will remove duplications and etc., but I believe that it's not only the collaboration, it's also how to provide services to people who are coming in and to identify, help them to find out what are the other needs they have. Or maybe there's a family, a husband is coming with wife and children, and how can they be engaged at the same time while the husband is going through an English class circle or job training. Thank you.
Julia?
So I work in a neighborhood of Scarborough called Warden Woods, and it is it was built as a social housing project in 1970, so it is like equivalent of like the projects kind of in its infrastructure. And so particularly our youth there don't often feel safe or comfortable leaving their community to access services in other communities. And so we have to bring as much as we can to their doorstep. But then if I think about things like LGBT-focused services, there would probably be a safety factor around bringing that to their doorstep, and so they'd want to travel for that. So there's kind of, depending on the service, people don't always want them all at their doorstep, or their community isn't ready to have those accessible. Yeah, I think it's complicated.
Okay. Wendy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the idea of you come in one door, and even if all the services are not available there, you can refer people to the appropriate places. I mean, one of the best bad examples, we know from the research, is the more highly educated a newcomer is, the least satisfied they're likely to be with settlement agencies. And, we had a particularly terrible example. I have an Afghan doctor working for me at the Diversity Institute, and he and 2 other recent Afghan refugees are working to support Afghan refugees. But when he first came to Canada, he went to a settlement agency and they said, "Oh, you want to work in healthcare? Oh, okay, we have a great program. We're going to train you to be a personal support worker. And you can, it's not accredited yet, but, we're confident it'll be accredited. Then you can get a job in healthcare, and then, you can work to be a doctor." Right? So he and 7 other Afghan doctors enrolled in this program, and after 4 months of wasting their time, they were told the program wasn't accredited and there was no job. We have to do a better job, and part of it's the funders, because the funders reward you based on what I would call bums in seats, how many people come in the door and participate in your program. We have to get better at directing people to the resources and the supports that will help them achieve their goals. And so if you're a settlement agency or faith-based organization, a doctor comes in the door, and you don't have a program for doctors, find out who can help, right? It's not that complicated, but we don't, in my experience, there hasn't been enough, someone noted the infrastructure. Organizations are not incentivized enough to work together. So if someone comes to me and I can't help them, I should be referring them to one of the other organizations that can. And in order for that to work, we have to all know more about what each other are doing. We have to have efficient ways to kind of be able to do that. So it's good use of resources. But for me, that's the goal. Whatever door someone comes in, they're going to get what they need to be successful.
Thank you. Rabbi?
There were 2 words that came up when I heard the statement, and I just want to lift up and echo what my fellow panelists have said, and they were hub and referral, right? So hub is this idea that someone walks in, and ideally, I think it should be in the neighborhood in which an individual or a family lives, because, well, economically, folks may not have a car. TTC just gets more and more expensive every year. So being able to have things as close to home, whether that's located in the faith-based organization or Toronto Public Library or community center, I think is really helpful. What I didn't hear in the panel, which I want to add in, is maybe working with the schools. Lots of individuals with children are coming in as newcomers, and so I wonder what the opportunity is in Toronto District School Board or any other district, public district school board, where kids themselves in a multi-faith, multicultural way are spending time in school together, living in the same neighborhood, of capitalizing on those types of resources. And then the referral thing is really important. The hub is really the door to walk in, but how do we, get it out? I just want to share one anecdote. There are only 15 million Jews in the whole world, and somewhere along the way, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, someone created a Google Doc that anyone could add to of every conference, every Jewish holiday, everything in the Jewish world. Now, of course, 15 million people aren't on this Google Doc, but a lot of people are all around the world. And that's just like a funny, but maybe not so funny example of like, well, how can we use technology to do exactly as you're saying, doctor, to really share best practices and also what we offer so that the collaboration and the referral is more seamless.
Thank you. So as we're gearing up for the near the end of our Q&A, one question I'd like to pose that I saw a bit on the Slido chat. I'll put this to our two faith leaders who have the voice of faith communities at the table today. One of the areas that we often look at, of course, we've heard from Julia and Wendy that, when working with people coming with newcomer faith traditions, sometimes lack of knowledge by agency staff around how to provide bereavement supports, maybe not understanding certain customs and rituals and practices from faith communities. So obviously a big focus on helping to learn more about those needs and differences for people from faith traditions. But also, the other piece within a Canadian context, we know that's very heavily supported through our human rights legislations around making sure that people who have identification from faith communities can be open about that. We talked a little bit about self-identification. But the other area I want to ask you specifically about is where we find that intersection, and we often refer to it as competing human rights values that many settlement agencies encounter, which is sort of, on one side, helping to support people with their religious identities and experience. At the same time, members in that community may also be looking to have their human rights for LGBTQ plus community, sexual orientation, gender issues, which can conflict sometimes with the need for religious expression. And what advice would you give to the agencies around our own working in faith communities to deal with the sometimes competing human rights values and issues that we have in this country that can sometimes conflict with the religious piece? I don't know, Rabbi, do you want to start? And then over to Imam. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't have a little bit of this conversation.
So there are lots of ways I could go. I'm saying I'm going to share something that is not simplistic at all, but I wish it was. And that is, in every religion, there is a spectrum. There's more liberal, more progressive, and to the right, one could say. And I think it behooves all of settlement agencies and social service agencies in the sector to really know the lay of the land in different religions. So, calling up the local Chabad in a neighborhood, which is, the Black Hat and the Payas Jews who live far to the right of me, that may not work for someone who is a newcomer to the country who is queer. Just may not be the right fit for them, but the DJC certainly is. So I know that sounds like so much easier, easier said than done, but I just think that it behooves us all to know the landscape of faith communities across spectrums of progressive and liberalness.
Yep, well said.
Without judgment, just to know what's out there.
Great, thank you. Imam, thoughts?
I agree with Rabbi Elie's response. At the same time, I also wanted to mention that no faith, faith ideologically, even if the faith communities or faith traditions have some disagreement with certain way of life or gender identity or sexual identity, etc., no faith discriminates in serving the need of people. That applies to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as well. So that I have never seen. So somebody is denied service because of their sexual identity. So that's the ground rule here. So based on that, and when a mosque is trying to work with a community service agency, definitely they can create that kind of a safe space for people to come and receive the service. On the other point about gender issue, definitely that is a big conversation among the Muslim leaders as well as the community leaders and the civic leaders. I see a reverse expression is happening in our area, for example. I believe that it's most applicable to all the GTA as well. You see, in the mosque boards, we don't necessarily see women are sitting on the board. There are some mosques, definitely they are creating space now. But on the other hand, if you look at all the non-profit organizations, community organizations, now we see Muslim Muslim women are leading this organization. They are in an influential position to decide decision-making positions. So here, it's kind of a reverse effect is happening when these leaderships are not given in a mosque space. They are leading these non-profit organizations. We see many examples of that. So when a mosque is trying to work with a non-profit organization, definitely the leader is of Muslim women who did not have a space in the mosque to start with.
Thank you. As we're wrapping up our Q&A section, session, I will put to the panelists, I'll ask you to give 15 seconds or less for your response, and really based on some of the theme I'm seeing in some of the Slido chat, as well as in the conversation we're having. Love to hear from you. What is one key value that you would want to leave with people that you feel is integral to the successful partnership of immigration settlement work with newcomers and together with faith communities? I'll start at the far left. Rabbi, what's 15 seconds or less?
15 seconds or less. A key teaching that comes from the very beginning of the Torah, the Hebrew Bible. Each human being is created, b'tselem Elohim, in the divine image. And if we can all, people of faith, people of no faith, settlement agencies, faith-based communities, see the humanity and the divinity in each person, it would do us all very well.
Round of applause for the rabbi. Wendy.
I think we have to focus on what unites us as opposed to what divides us.
Julia.
I might just say that we, sort of along the white supremacy conversation, that a lot of the water we swim in is Christian. And sometimes people's defaults in our workplace in terms of what we should do or what happens is a Christian default without, people think it's neutral, but it's Christian. And so it's so important to always question why we're doing it, who does it align with, is it comfortable, and expect it to be uncomfortable and expect there to be conflict in order to really make inclusive environment.
Imam, the last 15 seconds is for you.
I will say, a Quranic verse says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي Adam. That means we have honored, we have dignified every human being. It's nothing exclusion here. So everybody is being honored and dignified life. So that's the same dignity and honor we have to give to everybody who comes across our way.
Wonderful. Let's have a round of applause for all four panelists this morning. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts and comments and actually making us question things more. So a big thank you to all of you. Round of applause again. Thank you. And now it is the time that I think those of you who are on the right side out there, I think, who are here for the free food, that is that time right now. So thanks for your patience and everyone else for paying attention. Just a little bit of announcement about lunch. It is lunchtime, but it's also networking time. So please make sure you're talking with people you haven't met before. And please indulge our panelists as well. They're happy to talk with you over the lunchtime. The chicken at the buffet is all halal. The salads, pasta, roasted potatoes, now I'm salivating, vegetables, it's all vegan. Menu labels about allergens are all on the food items that should be present at the table over there. So please check out all of that. And please continue to check out the information at the sharing table. It's in front of the washrooms. What else do we have here? Take time to walk around and explore the wonderfulness of Black Creek Pioneer Village. You have some time here for lunch. I think we're regrouping at 1:15, so you have 1 hour to enjoy the food and the environment and yourselves. Thank you. So welcome everybody. I hope everybody had a good lunch. Yes? Yeah? Okay. Let's have a round of applause for the food. It was very good. A round of applause for the weather. It's phenomenal. I wasn't sure why they were handing out umbrellas this morning, and then I realized it was a precautionary measure in case it rained, but it didn't rain, which is great. So I'll introduce our first speaker for the afternoon. Happy to introduce Wendy Rowney, who's actually senior manager from Black Creek Pioneer Village. Round of applause for welcoming Wendy. She'll talk a little bit about their program
changing the narrative.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here and to see all of you. And this is our first outdoor event of the season, so I've also give a round of applause for the weather. I was asked to speak just really briefly about some of the things that we're doing here on a larger scale in a project that we're calling Changing the Narrative. So here at the Village, we are a work in progress. We're in the midst of changing the narrative about the stories we tell and figuring out how a living history museum like the Village can share these stories. So over the next very few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are today and where, with the guidance of a number of community partners, we're going. Bit of background. The Village is a living history museum comprised of 40 heritage buildings with a collection of 50,000 artifacts, and it's owned and operated by Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. In addition to the 5 buildings that remain right where they were built 200 years ago by an immigrant family, there are 35 other structures that were moved to the Village, mostly in the 1960s and 70s. Typically, the site hosts around 120,000 people every year, and about 30% of those who visit for educational reasons enjoy complimentary admission as part of our commitment to accessibility. As I said, as a site, we are in the midst of transformative change, including changing the name of the site to the Village at Black Creek later this year. Just as people in the 19th century reinvented themselves and what they thought was possible in the world, we're rethinking what a living history museum means in the 21st century. We envision the Village as a community commons with a museum at its heart, a place where the community gathers to reflect and re-energize, a place where heritage, art, music, artisanal workshops, and health and wellness all coexist in one unique setting. We envision a village where everyone can find their place. At the heart of this commons is a museum that shares stories that explore the history of the Toronto region over time and through many lenses. Recognizing that many stories have been left out of traditional tellings of our region's history, we've moved away from, and this is in big air quotes, typical pioneer village demonstrations towards interactive and engaging experiences that reflect the ideas and issues that our society is grappling with today. Since 2017, in a purposeful way, we've been working to change the site's narrative, guided by 5 First Nations and other partners, to highlight underrepresented histories and bring stories of equity-deserving individuals to light. So, how are we doing this? We're weaving these stories through our daily interpretation and programs. If you're here on a school trip, if you're here with your family, you'll hear these things. We're also working with a number of artists and bringing art into the Living History Museum experience. We're developing exhibits with community partners that are focused on telling their stories. And we're working with community partnerships to create events that are meaningful for the participants. If we look at exhibits first, since 2017, we've been looking at the intersection of Indigenous peoples and settlers in this region in the 1800s by working with a number of scholars of Indigenous history, most of whom are Indigenous, from York University, and guided by 5 First Nations. That research is finally completed, and we'll be moving into the exhibit stage. First, you have to do an interpretive plan to figure out what you're going to say in an exhibit, and then putting in the exhibit itself. The result, in a few years when you come here, will be a hub where we'll be sort of a home base talking about Indigenous history, and then through a number of nodes throughout the village, you'll be able to find thematic information related to the history of the Indigenous peoples living in this area. Currently, if you go into the building just down the road here, the log cabin with the blue door, you'll see our teaser or trailer exhibit, which is really talking about the work that is yet to come and sharing some of the thoughts from our partners on this exhibit. This same hub and node approach is what we're also taking to look at Black history, and we've started working with a scholar and academic of Black history at York University as well, and queer history. And we started this year working with some students from the University of Toronto to create an activity area called Pride in the Past, which will be opening up this fall. While exhibits are traditional ways of sharing information in museums of this type, art is not. You may have noticed as you entered the village today, and if you've had a chance to walk around, an art installation that's currently in place called Spirit Figures, which was created by a Mohawk and Melungeon artist, Rhonda Lucy from Sunraven Arts. Her idea was to create chicken wire, figures out of wire, and install them around the village. So they're there, you can see them, but you have to be looking. So they're hidden in plain sight. And this was her understanding when she's looking at the people who came before her in this area, and also the animals. All of these people and animals have spirits, and these spirits are around us all the time, and they're there if we would only look. So I encourage you, if you have an opportunity today, to walk around and to look for these spirit figures. In the schoolhouse right now, we have an installation by a Métis artist, Tracy May Chambers, and she's a textile artist who uses red yarn to create building-sized installations. The one in the schoolhouse this year is a comment on residential schools and the work that is required for decolonization. With funding from the Toronto Arts Council, we have 2 other arts groups on site over the next while. Vision Quest is here today. They may not be here right this moment, but they'll be here at some point today, and they are building a birch bark canoe on the property. And another group from Jumbly's Theatre is here on the first Saturday of every month, and they're running multi-art workshops, and the end result is going to be miniature scale models of the locations where the treaties were signed over the 19th century. These will then be installed around the site and used as backdrop for a theatrical performance in September. We're running a program called First Saturdays, which is the first Saturday of every month. We have an Indigenous or equity deserving artist on site, and they're sharing their art and their understanding of the region's past through their eyes. Just last Saturday, we had Queers in Your Ears, which is a queer storytelling collective here, telling original stories about what life might have been like for 2 LGBTQ individuals in this area in the 19th century. In July, we have an Inuk artist, Barry Best, who's coming in and talking about he's doing wood carving, traditional wood carving, and talking about another art installation which is coming based on an Inuk story called Spirit Wind. In addition to workshops we have planned this year with other Indigenous and equity deserving artists, we are also working with community partners. Last year we did our first relaxed day visit, which was specifically geared towards families with members who are neurodivergent and are looking for a slightly different type of experience. And you may see blue signs around all of the village. You can see one over there in the white building there. And those talk about what kind of sensory experiences people will have when they go into the building, which is really important for families with neurodiverse children so they can plan and decide whether that's the building they want to go into. So we put those up during the event, and we ended up leaving them up because we think they're important and their way of signaling that we're a welcoming location. We want all families to be able to enjoy their time here. We're also working with organizations and having 7 Caribbean concerts on our adjacent north property. Our first one is this weekend. I'm going back to meet with the organizers right after this. It's Juve in June, and it's the first of 7, as I said, Caribbean concerts which will be taking place on the property. As I mentioned earlier, our name is officially changing to the Village at Black Creek later this fall. We're removing the word pioneer from our title, and we'll be focusing on all of these things that I was just talking about, but our main focus is we really want to emphasize and drill down to the idea that a village is a place where many people come together. A village is a place where many people from many different places come together to create a community, and that's really what we see as our future of the Village of Black Creek. So thank you very much for coming here today. Thank you for letting me share our plans for the future. I know we have about 1 minute and 30 seconds left. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. And I'm also happy to let you get on with your day. So thank you very much.
That was wonderful. Talk about changing the narrative. Really exciting to hear about all of the wonderful things expanding here at the Pioneer Village from an equity perspective. Yeah, so a round of applause again for changing the narrative. Speaking of changing the narrative, we've got 3 concurrent workshops now. So we are, as we mentioned this morning, going to split you all up into a few different groups. So if you are part of workshop 1, and that's those of you with a blue circle sticker on your name tags, you'll be staying here in the main pavilion. And that's for workshop number 2 and 3, that's the green and red, you're going to be walking over to the I guess outside of the pavilion. I guess we have some people to put their hands up who are going to be leading you to your respective sessions that'll be in the main building. So please find out who your leaders are. They're putting their hands up now. For the red and green sessions, please start to get yourselves moving, and would ask you to be back here for around 2:30. So we have Rolla and Sylvie for the green workshop to follow them, as well as Kiruka and Azreen to help you for the red workshop. So please start moving, and we'll get the workshop number 1 started as soon as we have everybody settled.
Leveraging community partnerships and governance to enhance capacity for supporting newcomers. Just making sure you're in the right place. I'm Jody. I work for JIAS. We're a settlement agency and a sponsorship agreement holder serving diverse newcomers. The work that you do, that we all do, is hard. The meeting of basic needs and urgent needs like food and housing is hard. And helping people feel safe is also hard. It's a challenge. But one of the goals of this Faith Forum is to remind us that we're not alone in this work and in our shared goal of helping newcomers succeed. This Faith Forum, at its core, is to boost collaboration among faith communities and between faith communities and settlement service providers. And together with community partners and government, and that's what we'll be at in this session, we can share best practices, maximize resources, and be more effective in our work. So in this session, we'll have the opportunity to hear from 2 really tremendous resources. The first one, even its name is a wonder, the Toronto Newcomer Office. The fact that this exists is amazing. It's the city's internal center of expertise on newcomer and immigration issues. And the fact that we have that is actually worth, I think, a round of applause. So the Toronto Newcomer Office guides the city's efforts to ensure that programs and services are accessible to newcomers to improve their lives. And the second is an organization we are all familiar with, the United Way of Greater Toronto, which invests millions of charitable dollars in community agencies to power lasting solutions to poverty and to fill gaps in essential services, which this forum really addresses. The community of faith is really filling so many gaps, and together we can hopefully cover it. So in this workshop, we're going to have the opportunity to hear from representatives from each of these amazing resources, and then to ask questions and engage in discussion that will leave us better informed and better positioned to help newcomers succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody. I'm going to introduce our 2 wonderful speakers. So we will have the first speaker from Toronto Newcomer Office, and we will get to hear from United Way, then open it up for discussion. But first, our first speaker is Natasha Rawlings, who is a Policy Development Officer with the City of Toronto's Social Development Finance Administration, Toronto Newcomer Unit. Natasha has worked with diverse newcomer populations for more than a decade. Before joining the City of Toronto, Natasha held a position of Co-Associate Director at the FCJ Refugee Centre, where she focused on advancing access to justice for vulnerable newcomer populations, particularly undocumented Torontonians and asylum claimants. In her current role at the City, Natasha works to advance the Access to All policy, to enhance institutional capacity in understanding and supporting undocumented Torontonians, and supports the City's work to develop an intergovernmental strategy to support asylum claimants. Passing it on to you, Natasha.
Thanks very much, Ade. Can everybody hear me okay? So it's a real pleasure to be with you all today. As Ade mentioned, I work for the city's Toronto Newcomer office. And so I want to give you a little bit of context about the work that we do within the context of the corporation, the populations we serve, and then some of the work that we do in collaboration with other orders of government. Is that better? The feedback stopped? Perfect. So some of the information that I share may be all too familiar with you, but I think it's always important to have kind of a grounding in the conversation. So understanding first the landscape of the actual city in which we all work and live, Toronto, we know that it is, at many times, it's held the position as the most diverse city, not only in Canada, but across the world. And that really is a unique lens through which we not only navigate the city, but we also welcome newcomer populations. We have more than 200 ethnic origins, 140 languages spoken, and almost half of the city's residents are foreign-born. Of the remainder population, 26% have at least one parent who is foreign-born. So this really informs the fabric of our city, and it makes our city rich and diverse, and I think it's something that we're all very, very proud of. But I think that as we're navigating really anti-immigrant sentiment rising across different political parties and across the country, it's important to keep this lens in mind as we're living in a city that's so diverse and may have community members that are feeling very, very impacted by a lot of these changes. So I want to acknowledge the municipal role of settlement and integration, and really recognize that although immigration matters are held at the federal level and it's federal jurisdiction to govern immigration processes, we really see, and I think in this last year, no more than ever before, the way that municipalities have a significant role in supporting and integrating newcomer populations. It's the level of the government that's closest to the people, so not only do we see the impacts, but we also feel the impacts of newcomer populations as they settle into our communities. One of the other things I think that's really important to note that's unique about Toronto is Toronto's robust settlement network. And so while we see that IRCC, for example, is a primary settlement funder across the country, we know that there are significant gaps in access to service delivery because of immigration status. And I think Toronto really fills a gap in providing settlement services to those who fall through the cracks. So undocumented folks, international students, asylum claimants, who are not necessarily eligible for a lot of settlement funding across the country, find service and find home here and find networks of support. And I think that that's a reason that we see not only people choosing Toronto as their primary destination, but even returning even after they've left and they've tried living in another city or jurisdiction. We really see a high rate of return here in Toronto. Our office itself, I think it's always important to note that we do not provide direct services to newcomers. We work very closely with community partners. Everybody knows Ade, of course. Ade leads a lot of really phenomenal initiatives in our community, connecting organizations and acting as a bridge. And in many ways, that's a lot of our role. We work at the systems and policy level to make sure that policies and programs that are administered on behalf of the city are equitable in nature and are able to reach newcomers regardless of their immigration status. So we're a small unit. Our team is just 8 staff, and we were established in 2013, and we're housed within Social Development, Finance, and Administration. And I always think it's important to note that that's the division within this city that really holds a lot of the charters of justice and equity. So when we think of confronting anti-Black racism or poverty reduction or newcomer issues, these are all units and sections that live within Social Development, Finance, and Administration. And that really is a lot of the guiding charter that we have, not only as a unit, but as a division in this very, very large corporation. It's also important to note at a LIP event that we are a local immigration partnership. So while there are the 4 quadrant-based LIPs, we are a citywide LIP, and so we work across the municipality, but we also work on behalf of the municipality. So we have a dual funding and a dual mandate structure, whereby we implement programs and policies on behalf of IRCC, but also on behalf of the City of Toronto. And in many ways, a lot of these programs often align. That includes things like the Refugee Resettlement Program and the Refugee Capacity Plan, whose distinction I want to get into in a moment. Another important charter that we carry is the Toronto Newcomer Strategy. And so this is our guiding charter for about 5 years. It goes until 2026. And it has 5 key priorities, 2 of which I want to highlight here today. One of them is the rigorous implementation of Access TO. So that's the city's policy as it relates to undocumented Torontonians, making sure that those who are without status or with precarious status are able to access City of Toronto programs. And then our newcomer access plans, which is a really important program that's conducting kind of informal audits of other divisions and the way that they engage with newcomer populations to make sure that newcomers are not experiencing unnecessary barriers in accessing their services. An important distinction that I think that many of us would share is the support of refugees and asylum claimants. And in this room, we of course understand that refugee is an enormous word that carries a lot of different experience. And a resettled refugee has a drastically different integration experience to an asylum seeker or an asylum claimant. And we have two guiding charters that really support these different populations. The first is the Refugee Resettlement Program, and this was our first charter to support refugees. This was approved by City Council in 2015. And through this program, we have supported the integration of thousands of newcomers from federal resettlement efforts. So that includes Syrian refugees, Afghan refugees, and Ukrainian arrivals. We know that Ukrainians, kind of in the global context, as we've looked at the last few years, have been considered refugees, but in the Canadian legal context or immigration landscape, they don't hold a refugee status, they hold a unique status. But because they've arrived and they've been supported through a federal scheme, they have fallen under the jurisdiction of the Refugee Resettlement Program. Unique to that, and what brought many of us together over this last year, is the Refugee Capacity Plan. The Refugee Capacity Plan was approved by City Council in April of 2019, so it's a more recent plan. And it is mobilized to support kind of unexpected or unanticipated refugee arrivals, and is really activated in response to asylum claimants and unanticipated arrivals. And so, of course, we saw this activated last summer as we saw hundreds of unhoused African asylum claimants living on the streets and really in a dire crisis. One reframe that I think we've been trying to do, and we always want to make sure that we're mentioning as we're out in community, is that we do not consider this to be a refugee crisis. We consider this to be a socioeconomic, a housing, an affordability, and a shelter crisis that has drastically, disproportionately impacted refugee populations, and particularly African refugees recently. I think it is important to note that because I think that we are seeing, we're seeing changes in policy at the federal level where we're seeing kind of a conflation between the presence of newcomers and the exacerbation of a lot of the issues that we're facing. So we in this room know that international students are not the cause of the housing crisis, but when we're having conversations about a housing crisis and talking about limiting the number of international students coming, there's a direct correlation being implied. When we talk about a shelter crisis and we're calling it a refugee crisis, there's a direct implication that refugees are the cause of the shelter crisis, and not understanding that in fact they have been disproportionately impacted. So that's a reframing that we always think is important to do. I just want to close, and I want to leave time for my colleague to speak, and I want to leave time for us to have questions, but to just touch on a couple of important initiatives that we do that are a little bit more front-facing. Ade could speak to all of these much better than I can, but I'll do my best. We have a newcomer kiosks program, which provides settlement services, so it's kind of the closest that we get to settlement work, in city spaces, including City Hall. So we have a collaboration with 5 different settlement agencies, some of them are here today, to provide settlement services. An important note is that on the city facility, on City Hall, regardless of the fact that many of these agencies have a mandate to serve only those who would fall within IRCC eligibility criteria, because they are operating on City Hall, they serve everybody regardless of immigration status and provide information, and sometimes they would provide a referral. If they don't have the full capacity of information or they can't provide the service, they would be able to refer the individual to somebody who could. We also, of course, have the Access TO policy, which is what I usually speak a lot more in depth about, but this is the policy that was adopted in 2013 to ensure that all residents of Toronto, regardless of their immigration status, have access to municipal programs and services to make sure that people are not discriminated against based on their immigration status. In partnership with this, we have held several events, including Undocumented Residents Day, which we will host again this year. That's been proclaimed now 2 times, and it will be proclaimed again a 3rd time this year, to really mark the city's commitment to supporting this population. And the City of Toronto's Newcomer Office is also supporting the citywide, when there is an announcement of a regularization program, which we hope happens anytime now, that the city is going to have an institutional capacity to provide information and resources. And so we're doing training with community partners to make sure that that's all involved. So I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague Teresa, and then we'll hopefully have lots of time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natasha, and I'm sure many of you were taking notes and eager to ask your questions. I'm going to do a very brief introduction of Teresa from United Way. Teresa has held several positions. Sorry. Probably. Turn the other one on. Okay. Teresa has held several positions since joining United Way back in 2008. She started as a Speakers Bureau and Agency Tour Coordinator, then joined the newly formed Neighborhoods team as Associate Manager from 2012 to 2020. During this period, this period also included interim placements with the Capacity Building and Youth Success Strategy teams. Teresa joined the Community Services Sector team as a CI Manager in March 2020, right at the start of COVID, with responsibility for the settlement portfolio. During her tenure at United Way Greater Toronto, she has been involved in granting, donor sponsorship and engagement, capacity building, community engagement, communications, and volunteer recruitment. We're very glad to have you here with us. I'll pass the mic back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me add that I literally started this position on the first day of lockdown, just for a little context. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of United Way. I'm sure many of you know about us, but maybe not the full kind of depth of the United Way. United Way is a movement. It's a global movement, but it's probably more so in North America. And we're basically an organization that raises money every year and then distributes that money to social services. And while it is a bigger movement, it's implemented regionally or locally. So the United Way of Greater Toronto operates in Toronto, York, and Peel. Thank you. I wanted to, okay, so here, let me give you an idea of the kind of areas that United Way has. Of course, we raise money every year from $0. So all of the money that we dispense is raised through corporate and individual donations. We also then have the granting side of United Way, which I'm part of, and I'm going to come back to in a minute. But just to give you an idea, we also have a research team which works individually and also collaborates with educational institutions and other research organizations. And the research revolves around inclusive communities, job precarity, homelessness and housing, those kinds of things. And they're all connected to trying to reduce poverty in the city. We have a public policy and mobilization team. Our leadership is involved on countless tables and networks, and we work with government agencies, and we try to, we're also advocates for this sector. In terms of the granting, which is the area that I'm involved in, our grants come into a couple of buckets. We have two multi-year grant streams, which fund almost 300 community agencies. We have 69 anchor agencies. They receive a 5-year funding, and their role, they receive funding to provide programming, but they're also considered kind of a closer partners to United Way. They have a lot of influence in the sector in their communities, and they help us achieve our mandate as well. We recently added 11 equity-deserving organizations to the anchor stream as well. We have 200 agencies that receive 3-year grants for programs, and they deliver 300 programs. And these run the gamut from infants, like early childhood, through to seniors, homelessness and housing, mental health and addictions. They cover, we group things into 13 issue areas. my particular portfolio is settlement, which is why I'm here with you today. As well as that, we also have a number of special initiatives, including the Afghan and African emergency resettlement, and I'm going to be coming back to that very soon. Another important role that we serve, apart from funding, is we do a fair bit of convening, and that's with business, government, and community organizations. And I think it's really important that, given that the GTA, as mentioned, is the sort of locus of immigration and newcomers in Canada, settlement is a big component of a lot of the social service delivery that happens in the GTA, even if it's not technically considered a settlement service. It's just we know that that is the population that lives here and seeks the services of this particular group. In terms of convening, we work very closely with the City of Toronto, and most recently during COVID, we put together the convening tables known as clusters. I'm sure many of you sit on geographic or issue-based clusters. And initially that was extremely important to help mobilize the social service sector, the human sector, individuals and organizations to meet the immediate needs of those who were most impacted by COVID. So there was a lot of food delivery, mental health checks, wellness checks, that sort of thing. And so that was the initial goal of those clusters, to help the organizations on the ground to be effective and coordinated. And those were an innovation that we felt was very effective, and they continue to this day with a slightly different mandate, but that role of coordinating and advocating for the sector is still a part of those clusters. The United Way co-chairs the Newcomer Leadership Table. We sit on a couple of different local immigration partnerships, and there's also representation on regional leadership tables. So that basically means in York and Peel. And then we sit on cross-sectoral tables, example with healthcare, with immigration, with other things of that nature. So that's like a very high-level overview of the United Way. In terms of the settlement funding, our goal, our aim in this particular area, is to enable the social inclusion of immigrants and refugees in our communities and help them reach and develop their full potential. And that is what everyone here is doing. We focus on funding programs that serve the most vulnerable newcomers and temporary residents by addressing service gaps and those ineligible for federal or provincial settlement funding. So as you all know, IRCC has very specific requirements. We kind of look at where those gaps are and focus our funding on that. We support a range of programs in this area, including those that address immediate needs, programs that are about community connections, and in order to enhance longer-term integration and participation. And then within that, we have programs that meet the unique needs of specific groups, such as refugees, seniors, those with mental health issues, groups that are kind of grouped around language or culture, or perhaps gender or another type of group. Apart from our regular, those two buckets of funding, one of the ways that United Way attempts to meet emerging needs or issues is we always reserve a certain amount of money so that we can respond to needs. And in the last 4 years, emergency funding has been one of those. So United Way, along with 2 other national organizations, was contracted to deliver the federal government's COVID response, emergency COVID response. So that entailed 2 rounds of federal government emergency funding for basic needs and a most recent round of recovery funding. Additionally, United Way, with its own resources, also implemented 3 rounds of emergency funding. And in 2016, we were co-sponsors of the Syrian Relief Fund, and that was again targeted at the government-assisted refugees from Syria. In 2021, we used that model that worked very effectively for the Syrian community and established the Afghan Resettlement Fund. That was a targeted fund. We identified agencies that were working with Afghan newcomers and or had the sort of linguistic capacity to work with that group. We had assistance from Lifeline Afghanistan and the City of Toronto, and we funded 16 projects totaling $400,000. Emergency funding in these, like the COVID funding, the emergency funding, the Afghan funding, one of the real benefits for United Way, I mean, obviously the agencies benefited from the funding, but for us, it allowed us to have contact or be aware of grassroots groups that we had not otherwise had any kind of exposure to. Many grassroots groups, and including faith-based organizations, were recipients of emergency funding. And it allowed us also to provide some support to a societal layer that provides really essential services and connections to newcomers. It also helped us to better target outreach for later funding that we implemented. So we had a much better knowledge of who was out in the community. And it helped us to connect groups to networks and other service providers, because that's also an important role for our team, is to act as that, not just a convener, but a connector with agencies. Because unfortunately, we do not have the funding to give to every organization that deserves to be funded. So we really stress making connections within the community. So most recently, the United Way's response to the African asylum seekers starting last year was that we heard from those on the ground, Black-led and Black-serving organizations across the GTA, including faith-based groups that really stepped up to address the lack of any kind of accommodation for the African newcomers who are sleeping rough. They're the ones who came to us and raised the alarm. So, and they came to us through the various networks we live on, we sit on, our relationships with agencies in the community. And like that includes the clusters, the leadership table, etc. And so we were able to put together an emergency fund. Like within a couple of weeks, we put together a fund. We identified organizations that had been responding to the crisis, and we were able to do a granting call on this is maybe more technical than you need, but typically with a grant call, everyone has the same deadline. You submit your applications, we review them, we dispense. And because the need was great, we did it on a rolling basis. So the applications came in, and we dispensed the funds as they were approved. So through this emergency fund, we were able to invest $630,000 in the community. We had a $100,000 grant from the Mariam Assefa Fund, and then United Way contributed another $336,000. We funded 42 projects, including a really important collaborative led by Margaret's Community and Housing Support Services. Of those 42 agencies, 29 were Black-led and serving, and 8 were what we call non-qualified donees. So they had not-for-profit status, but not charity status. And this is a new, it comes out of the CRA rulings, where we are able to fund directly to not-profit organizations without charity status. Additional to that pocket of money, through another funding stream, we were able to provide some $50,000 for coordination of responses in York Region. And our Reaching Home Fund in York provided almost another $200,000 for service delivery and basic needs in York Region. Now, earlier on, we were talking about, the earlier panel was talking about granting expectations. And just to provide some context, in my 15 years at United Way, I am not aware of any, like the kind of level of granting that we did during COVID, where we were an administrator for another, like a government. And emergency funding tends to be more accessible. The focus is on meeting needs. So we are much more broad. We were able to be more broad in providing funding to agencies that wouldn't necessarily meet the criteria for our multi-year funding. So they have to be registered as a not-for-profit. They have to have a clear connection to the funding criteria, the target population, the activities and outcomes, basically whatever is included in the grant call. The programs can have no discriminatory practices in access and delivery of the service. And this is where we get into the discussion of like faith-based organizations providing service. And we definitely fund faith-based organizations, but there does have to be a demonstration that the service is open to anyone in the community. And I say that knowing that if you offer a program in a particular geography of the city, you're perhaps more likely to get a certain group of participants. That's just the way it works. And so if you're a faith-based organization, we wouldn't expect that your participants necessarily are going to reflect like the full scope of the city of Toronto. But the importance is that it not be a religious activity per se. There are gray areas, which we can talk about during the question period. The other thing I have to say is that United Way has a limited pool of funds. We're a large funder for United Way, but we're a very small funder in the overall scheme of things. We raise $110 million. We distribute about, don't quote me, but it's about $90 million directly to community. So in order to have access to that limited pool of money, we're very concerned, not concerned, part of our mandate is to not jeopardize those agencies that we fund. We don't want to destabilize the sector. So when we do a grant call, we're very conscious of ensuring that those programs that are well run, well delivered are continued. But we're also trying to bring in new programs based on their proof of good practice, that they're meeting an important need. And we do occasionally not renew funding, but that's generally not we don't enter into a funding call thinking, well, everyone starts from ground zero. There is this, push and pull about maintaining stability. The other thing about our multi-year funding is there's a much bigger emphasis on meeting industry standard and evidence-based program design, monitoring, and evaluation. At the level of an emergency fund, that is not as important because that's not the mandate of that fund. For our multi-year program funding, we do want to see those elements. The other thing is that the agency must have adequate levels of staffing to deliver its programs, as well as strong governance, financial, and operational policies and practices. So I can share with you in the last round of funding for our 3-year grant, because we had been doing so much emergency funding, we received 700 applications. We were only able to fund 1 in 4. And many of the applications that we received were from small grassroots organizations that we know that they're providing a service to the community, but they wouldn't necessarily meet those standards of being able to have evidence of those more rigorous standards for delivery of a program. And while we understand that grassroots organizations are really important in this sector, we are not necessarily a grassroots funding body because we just can't fund everyone. So one of the ways that we work with grassroots organizations is through the networks that we work with, we recommend, like, I will often get calls from a group saying, how can I get funding from United Way? And we will explain our funding model, but I will also always encourage organizations to find out who else is in your community or who is working with the particular target population that you have. Make connections with the people in your community, the agencies, the local immigration partnerships, any other network that you can find, and try to find some synergies so that maybe you're serving a niche population compared to what this group is serving, and you can work together to provide some services or programs. And the more connected you are within the community and the sector, I think it increases your chances of getting funding from any kind of funder, like across the board, foundations, governments, organizations like ours, because it indicates a kind of deeper connection to service delivery model. I just had a couple of other points, and they're really actually kind of basic. Like, if you're a grassroots organization or a faith-based organization and you want to find out more about what's happening in your area, if you don't know specifically of any organizations, 211 is an amazing resource. I'm sure all of you know about it. Costi has settlement.org. These are great resources. The local immigration partnerships are really critical to finding out more about who's working in your area. And it's found on the City of Toronto webpage, York Region websites. There's one in Peel as well. And reach out to these organizations, invite them to your events, ask them to present or come and visit your organization. Refer members of your congregation to your local organizations and suggest 211. 211 is also a multilingual service. Funders are always looking for innovative and effective collaborations when making funding decisions. And that has, I think the collaboration has increasingly become an element that we look for when we're doing grant calls. I'm going to stop there. I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Teresa. You covered so many different areas. We think, sorry, is this okay? Yep. Okay. So we're going to open it up for questions. I know you've been patiently listening, and I'm sure you were jotting down some burning questions you may have. So I will come with the mic. Go ahead. Okay.
We're just going to make the mic a little longer.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the excellent presentations. I just had a couple of quick questions for you, Natasha. I'm a businessman. I've been on the board of several nonprofits and founded one myself. But, I've been working mainly with refugees in the last year, and with 53% of, people in shelters being refugees, the refugees are definitely a factor with the whole shelter situation. And refugees, are often, have sort of culturally sensitive needs. And so it seems to really make sense to try and encourage more, shelters or warming centers or respite centers for refugees. And I'm wondering why that's not happening more. I mean, it is a sensitive issue, I guess, if you're helping refugees, but the people that are already there are not being helped as much. It's a question, but you know, if you're moving refugees out of the shelter system, it's really going to benefit the overall shelter system. And then, you know, we've got hundreds of empty buildings in the city, and a lot of retail stores are empty. And you know, I've worked in the retail development field, so you know, some of these could be adapted for shelters, you know, micro shelters or warming centers quite easily. And then, you know, the government's, as you know, has been paying $200 and more per night for hotel rooms and renting thousands of hotel rooms. So we're not talking here about wanting more money or needing more funding. We're talking about redirecting the funding that's already being spent. And just one last point is with 129 Peter. I've worked beside groups trying to access 129 Peter, the city intake center, for over 10 years. And, you know, it's way under, you know, way over capacity as far as what it can handle. So, you know, 10 years is a long time. You know, people have to phone and phone and phone. And there's people sleeping on the sidewalk still, you know, this week. So from a policy standpoint, why has that not been addressed, I guess, as an issue, as a question?
I share an applause because I think that you've raised really important questions and really important points. I will say that there is traction on a few of the things that you've said. Not enough and not fast enough, but important work is underway. I will give the caveat that I can't provide a completely fulsome response because shelter operations are housed within a different division, but I will answer to the effect that I'm able to. One of the points about empty buildings being stood open, that's absolutely a fact, and I think that that's becoming an increased conversation. Similar to United Way having their funding frameworks, Shelter Standards has a certain standard framework for what kind of building can be used as a shelter. But I do know that Shelter has looked at different facilities to see if they could operationalize some of these. Your first point was about refugees occupying about 53% of the shelter occupancy, and that's true. I think one of the important points to note is that, and I know that the head of the shelter division had said this, so I'm copying him, but no one leaves shelter without some sort of supports, and the subsidies that are available are absolutely inadequate. And particularly for those who are not yet eligible for things like Ontario Works or other subsidy programs. But the supports to exit shelter for the refugee and the non-refugee populations are absolutely important and really need to be increased. And I know that there is advocacy for that to be underway. There have been council motions about the creation and the delivery of a unique shelter system. And there are several refugee shelters that are operated on behalf of the city. To provide those deliberate services, because we know that the needs of a refugee and the needs of somebody who's experiencing homelessness are different and need to be addressed uniquely. So that is underway. I'm just trying to make sure that I touch all of your points. The last was about, sorry, can you remind me about the last question? I didn't make a note. Peter Street, yeah, so Peter Street remains a capacity issue. I know that it is a concern, and I know that one of the methods that the City of Toronto has leveraged in recent months and over the last couple of years is transfers to IRCC hotels. One of the challenges that we see with those transfers is that for clients to be eligible for those transfers, they have to have initiated their asylum claim process. And so those who've arrived either irregularly or arrived through another status and don't hold a refugee claimant status at that time, are not yet eligible for some of those transfers. So there are a lot of mechanisms that are trying to be leveraged. There's a lot more work that has to be done. I always encourage contacting your elected officials, contact your local
Nonprofit faith organizations could really benefit here, as we saw,
Right.
you know, with the asylum seekers.
Right.
So we're, you know, there's a 150-page code book for the city shelters.
Yeah.
And I know one that's, you know, taken over 4 years to open.
Yeah.
So, there's a real need to involve faith organizations,
Yeah.
nonprofit faith organizations that could really help here.
No, I agree, and I know that there have been recent motions at council, and there have been recent direction from political leadership to explore community resource programs that are supporting refugees in finding housing and in housing solutions. We know that these programs are delivering a better product and a better service and are more fiscally responsible. And so there have been council motions to this effect. We are limited in the work that we do at the direction of council and at the direction of where those dollars are going to be spent through the budgets. But I would always encourage you to continue sharing this messaging with your elected officials, and then any operational questions that you have can be directed to the Toronto Sheltered Standards Support Services Division.
Thank you. Hello, Natasha. The question is for you. So I'm very glad that you said that at least the city is clear about calling this not a refugees crisis, but a socio-economical crisis, right? But that's not what we see in the headlines in the main media. Does the city have a strategy to intercept or to clarify that?
The city, and of course, I don't have the ability to speak on behalf of the entire corporation, let alone my own division. But I would say that there is, in a city like Toronto, in a country like Canada, one body cannot control what another body says, right? So if there are media stories that are running, one of the panelists was saying earlier that a lot of the negative rhetoric is through rampant misinformation and the lack of really standing fast in front of that and saying this is not true. And so I don't think that this can rest on one person alone, or even a body like the City of Toronto as a government or a civic service. And so in terms of messaging that the City of Toronto puts out, there are of course mechanisms in place to make sure that subject matter experts for whatever the topic is are being consulted on what messaging is shared. But when messaging is shared more broadly, I think it's up to all of us as residents to be trying to confront that in a really tactical way, because I don't think that that can rest on any one person.
Thank you, Eddie. I'll stand so I can see Natasha as I address you. Thank you very much. I have two very brief questions. Well, maybe first is a comment. Thank you very much. We appreciate the work you do. I could have asked you this. This is for Natasha. I could have asked you this off the microphone, but while you're at it, I guess I'll just ask it. I am very aware of what the document says, or what on paper it says, that the person who arrived in the country and they're looking for a bed, they should not be discriminated on the basis of their immigration status. But I want to unfortunately share with you that I am very aware, just as of last Wednesday, an experience where I have a phone call from a person who is at Peter Street. They have been there trying to get into the shelter system. They are calling every 2 hours, as we have been instructed to instruct them. But one of the questions they are asking them is, do you have a UCI number? So that has almost become a criteria for accessing a bed in the shelter system, which, so I don't know what the people on the other end of the phone who are asking that question, I don't know what messaging they are giving the people, but I will tell you how it is being received. It is being received as though if you don't have, so a UCI number is the, what's it called? Unique client identifier. So that's the number you have once your claim for refugee has been received. Some people don't have that, but they're refugees. So I don't know what messaging has been given, but I will tell you what has been received on the end of the people that are trying to get into the shelter system. That if you don't have a number, you don't get the bed. So I'm trying to tell them on the phone that, guys, I don't think that is accurate. They ask, Pastor, is it true if you don't have a UCI number, you don't get a bed in the shelter? I said, not as far as I know, but I'm not a shelter worker, but the little I know, that should not be accurate. So that is for you. Yeah. And now for Teresa, before I sit down, thank you so much. We appreciate United Way. I can testify that we received at least $10,000 in that emergency fund when we applied as a collective. There is something many organizations are looking at right now. I can speak for an organization like Young Street Mission that I'm familiar with because of my work with them. The mindset of lowering the barrier for access to services, low barrier in terms of the criteria for anyone you're serving. When you say that part of the requirement for organizations is to have, let's see exactly how you said it, an adequate level of staffing. Now, our lived experience to some of the small organizations who have helped us significantly during the crisis are small organizations who actually don't have an adequate level of staffing. I can give an example of a catering company. Without that, it's a very small company, but without that company, I don't know how we would have managed the feeding of 215 people every day for the last 9 months. So is there something that you can consider to lower the barrier when it comes to things like staffing?
Maybe I can address the first question first. So thank you, Pastor Eddie, for your question and, of course, for the ongoing work that you do in community. It's so important. I will say, absolutely, the information that's been provided to the client is incorrect and must be challenged. We have policies, we have policy positions, and we have statements in place. But of course, the City of Toronto is comprised of human beings, and there is error that happens. But I would say that in an error such as this, that is often quite grave, to deny somebody a service based on their immigration status is contrary to the Access TO policy position. And I would say that that should be challenged. And I think that, I as a staff welcome that kind of a challenge. I think it should be reported each and every single time that it happens. I maintain close relationships with people in the sector, particularly at the FCJ Refugee Centre. And as a proud staff of the City of Toronto, I'm also deeply ashamed when I hear that these infractions are happening, and I think that they really have to be challenged. There are ways within each division that you can engage in a challenge when a service has been provided that is incorrect or discriminatory. And so you can go through official complaints processes. This can also be done on behalf of a client. So I know that when we work with clients who are dealing with precarious status, maybe they themselves don't feel comfortable, nor should they have to bear the burden of engaging in a formal complaint. But you, Pastor Eddie, could, if you wanted to, on behalf of a client, engage in a complaints process, even up to the Ombudsman, which is an independent body. And to say that this individual was told that they would not get a shelter bed without a UCI, that is not true. But it must be confronted. So I would even ask, if you don't want to go through an official complaints process, I would even ask that you email me and that you put that in writing to me, and I will, whether you email me or not, I will take that back and I will talk to our partners in shelter and with Central Intake to reaffirm the message. And trust me, it is affirmed over and over and over again, but we know that more training has to take place to say that this cannot happen and it is simply discriminatory. So I thank you for raising that, and I'm sad to hear that it continues to happen.
Thank you. And thank you, Pastor A. And I want to share with other people that Pastor A is a member of an advisory committee that we have struck for a research project on the lived experience of the African refugees over the last period, so that we can better learn how to coordinate where the gaps are and that sort of thing, and that's across the region. But to come back to your question in terms of adequate levels of staffing, we are very, very aware of the fact that many agencies struggle with adequate levels of staffing. There's a high level of turnover, of hiring and staff retention is an issue. When I'm talking about adequate levels of staffing, what I'm really referring to is an organization like that maybe applied for a 3-year grant, but they're really a one-person organization that is proposing to run a number of different activities. And when we look at that, we can see that like there's a disconnect between the staffing model and the activities that they're proposing. And if there's not enough information on how that would be delivered, either with contract staff or volunteers or something like that, that will go into our decision making around the staffing. Or for example, if providing counseling is one of the activities, well, we want to make sure counseling is very sensitive. and we want to make sure that the staff has the right qualifications to be providing, you know, one-on-one kind of counseling. So that's what I mean in terms of adequate level of staffing, because basically across the sector, there's probably no organization that has the right level of staffing. So just that caveat, and thank you for bringing that up so I could clarify.
Thank you so much. We're going to have to wrap up very quickly. I see 2 hands up. We were given 5 minutes, so we're going to try to keep it very over there, and I'll come to you as the last question.
Thank you so much. My name is Salah. This is my first time attending here. I am representing Afro Newcomers Organization. The issue of using the right terminology and addressing the issue of refugee crisis goes beyond discussion in media, and it has become a policy implication, and there has become a capping of international students coming or admitted to coming into Canada. Therefore, in my opinion, if there is any possibility that if the city is affected, the city knows what's going on, the city understands as a local government, if there is any communications through the government channels in terms of addressing the right problem or addressing the right problem, calling the right problem into the right terminology, I was wondering if it's possible, if there is advocacy that this organization, grassroots organizations can provide any kind of support in terms of advocacy towards the federal government. That's one. The second one is about the criteria. The criteria of getting services, for example, for refugees or newcomers, is very, very difficult, because unless and otherwise you have a certain SIN number that starts with a certain number, you are not getting the services in order to get employment support services, to land into employment, which will serve the economy and which will serve the government. So in my opinion, again, if there is any possibility that we can help you as local grassroots level organizations to advocate towards that in terms of incorporating any newcomer to the economy and giving them the necessary services. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for the questions. We'll answer as briefly as possible. In terms of advocacy that the sector can do, I know the sector continues to advocate and plays a really important role. I know that there are intergovernmental conversations that happen between the different orders of government, but really I think we have to remember that when it comes to the number of people that are being admitted through various channels of immigration, that is a federal jurisdiction. And so I say that while there are conversations that happen between the orders of government, any advocacy that the sector engages in is really important to make sure that the voice of the people is heard when those decisions are being made. When it comes to eligibility, the City of Toronto has its programs to make sure that people, regardless of their status, are eligible for city services. This, of course, only goes so far as municipal programs that are municipally funded and municipally run. And so Toronto Employment and Social Services, Ontario Works program is not eligible for undocumented residents because it's a provincial funding delivered on behalf of the municipality. We know that there is campaigning happening for regularization, and the hope that that will be a broad and inclusive program that will be a real, true, sustainable solution to a lot of the inequities that you've raised. But I would return to suggest that a lot of these issues are federal in scope.
Yeah, if I can just add that United Way has no such criteria barriers, so all programs that are funded through United Way are open to anyone. And in terms of advocacy, I'd like to just make a plug for the Migrant Workers Association, because they do an enormous amount of organizing and advocacy, and they're a great organization to maybe get in touch with to see if there might be an opportunity for you to work with them, or members of your organization to work with them. And they're very much a membership model, so they're really about empowering the people that are most affected by these regulations to advocate as well.
Hello, I'm one of the co-founders of a non-profit. It's an organization called A Better Future for All. We work with Ukrainian newcomers since the war started. And I have a few comments and a few questions for you guys. So we've seen quite a few situations when Ukrainian newcomers come and basically on the brink of homelessness because there is not enough initial support. And I find it that when you help families in the critical like first months to establish, find first job, find a first place to live, it actually reduces so much stress on the family. Like a lot of problems can go away if you offer a little bit more support initially. We are seeing people even to this day sleeping at the airport when they arrive in Canada, like with kids for a few days, because Red Cross provides sometimes 2 weeks free accommodation for families. They basically have no places to to house all the people that need accommodation. We were helping one guy that was sleeping in a tent in Richmond Hill. He became homeless in 3 months since he arrived in Canada. He's never been homeless in his life. We've seen people having mental health breakdown, families separate. A lot of Ukrainians actually went back after spending all of their savings and going through such a horrible time in Canada. And unfortunately, I think this is avoidable because when people arrive in Canada, they went through the war, they went through really difficult times. They at least, looking for some support. We gave them visas, we gave them maybe $3,000 when they arrived, and we let them basically find their way in Canada without much support. I find this is very difficult on a lot of Ukrainian refugees, and when it comes to settlement and support, what government offers, yes, there are some welcome centers and different organizations, but they don't provide emergency support, they don't provide service after hours, and a lot of times volunteer organizations like mine, we receive phone calls when somebody is sitting at the bench somewhere, at the bus stop and saying, I have no place to go today. They have no food to feed their kids. So I know in Europe they have a lot of interesting sort of creative ways to incentivize citizens to help refugees. For example, they pay percentage of the rent, like government pays people that can open their doors to refugees. And a lot of times we would go into community, ask our friends who can help this family to stay until we find permanent accommodation. And a lot of times people would say, okay, I have a basement. Or we actually had one couple sleeping in a house that was renovated for a few months. So we asked the person, like, could they stay for like a couple of weeks until we find a better place. We've seen a lot of people basically in tears saying Canada is the worst place. And it hurts me because I know Canada is not the worst place. I think a lot of policies need to be reviewed and somebody needs to track what are we doing with Ukrainian refugees. Are we doing something better or are we doing something worse for this particular population? Are there any statistics? Is government organizations tracking anything? The question I have is that actually we are looking for funding. We have a few innovative programs. We want to use technology to help more people. We are building a mobile app and need partners and funding. We also build a social club for Ukrainian seniors who are really lonely and feel stress and social isolation in Canada. I'd like to invite everyone to check our website, A Better Future. It's better-future.org. All our programs mentioned there. We're looking for partnerships and funders. Thank you.
I'm so sorry. I don't know if we have actually time to respond to that. The other group is coming back. The other group is coming back. If there is a very brief response, like a 30-second response,
I am aware of one program. It's run by Costi, and it's a host program which was funded by United Way, and it was especially created for Ukrainians to help match Ukrainians with homeowners, which are offering exactly what you're talking about, like the temporary accommodation. No, I know it's not enough. But COSTI, I think, is an organization you might want to, if you're not already in touch with them, and I'll give you my information.
I just want to say one final note, and I feel that I would be remiss if I didn't say this. It's unfortunate when any one person is left sleeping rough or is going through the trauma that you're describing. But I do want to say, from kind of a policy standpoint, I think that the Ukrainian resettlement effort has actually set a much higher standard than a lot of other incoming populations have seen and received. As we spoke about, we saw hundreds of African asylum seekers sleeping outside for months last year. And so I think that there are a lot of learnings about the positive ways that Ukrainians have been supported. There is still much, much work to be done. And of course, that needs to be addressed, because we don't want to see anybody going through those experiences. But I think there's actually a lot of positive learnings that have been engaged in from the Ukrainian response that can and should be leveraged for other populations.
Thank you both so very much. I think what was said by the elder this morning about speaking from the heart was definitely demonstrated in your passion about your work. I am privileged to work alongside Natasha. I know that it's not just work, but very much of a passion, and Teresa demonstrated that this is not just a 9-to-5 job for you. Thank you. I think that's my cue that our time has ended, but I want to say thank you to both of you so very much. If I can just add one last note, I think one common theme that we heard today was that the disconnect that a lot of grassroots organizations and faith-based organizations, not just a disconnect, but a service gap in accessing funding. And from your presentation, Teresa, it sounds like we could all benefit from some sort of capacity building for grassroots organizations to understand funding structures and accessing resources. And maybe that is something that we should explore as local immigration partnerships and as different tables. So maybe that is a conversation to continue, but I just want to say thank you to both of you. Jody, last words?
You've said it. Thank you so much. I think this was really, it's the beginning, not the end, right? I think part of being here is understanding where to direct inquiries and where to look for information. Thank you so, so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise today. Thank you.
While we're waiting for everybody to trickle back, if you see some sticky notes on your table, write down 1 or 2 words that illustrate what collaboration means to you. We already have a wall with a few sticky notes on it, but we would like to see a lot more.
All right, let's get started, everybody. So we're going to do a little bit of a round table just to get things moving here so we can all get out of here and enjoy the rest of the wonderful sunny day. So just by a show of hands, who attended Workshop 1 here at the Pavilion? I think you guys are back at your seats, so we have a few people here. Who would like to offer a bit of shortness of what did they learn in that workshop session? Anybody from, well, keep your hands up, Workshop 1. Everyone put their hands down when I asked for feedback. Who was at Workshop 1? Workshop 1? No, nobody now. Okay. We have one person who's heading that session. Anything you want to share about the learnings? What did you hear?
We heard from representatives from the Toronto Newcomer Office and from the United Way of Greater Toronto. And we learned about some of the resources that are in place. We talked about some of the gaps. And I would say one of the key takeaways, which was reiterated by Ade at the end, is that for small grassroots groups, it's important to convene in the same way that we convene within the sector so that people understand what the resources are that are available and how they can tap into things and who they can collaborate with, right? You have to know who's in the room in order to know how to partner. Thank you.
One round of applause. That's great. Let's see how this next part goes. Who was at workshop 2? Oh, you put your hand up really quickly. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nagla Mosad. I attended the second workshop about how increasing the joint advocacy between newcomer service community and the faith community. So what I learned about this one, that the togetherness and the healing, it works very good for everyone who came to Canada, and building the connection between the community service with faith group, it works so good to increase the service for newcomer. It will help because the faith leaders can change a lot and affect for newcomers. They believe in their service, and we get 2 guests from police service in Toronto, and they give a good example how they connect the people in their community to police service to change the concept about police, because many countries they are afraid to speak with the police, but here in Toronto, they are friendly, they help people to make their life safe and most simple. Thank you.
Amazing, wonderful. Thank you for that. And the last workshop, number 3, hands up for anybody who attended workshop number 3, and that was the red workshop. Nobody was there for that? I don't think so. Well, okay, gentlemen, courageous fellow here, Jonathan. You want to tell us what you learned in that session?
Absolutely. I learned about services for people living with disability in Toronto and how their families are being supported. And I learned about the importance of talking about sexual health and having access for information, dispelling misinformation, and supporting and preventing.
Thank you. Okay, we're getting very close to the end of our session. Before the closing remarks, just wanted to again draw attention to the sharing wall we've been talking about all day, where people have put up some sticky notes with one word or a phrase of what collaboration means to them. We're not going to go to that wall necessarily right now, but I'd be happy to see who's courageous here to put up their hands to share a word that for you sums up the meaning of collaboration. Anybody have a word they want to offer?
It's support, advocacy.
2 words are better than 1. That's great. Anybody else? Yes. Go ahead. Maybe just shout it out. Respect. Great. Anybody else over on this side of the crowd? Let's not. Power. Okay. Sharing power, maybe even, right? Anybody else? You have solidarity. Teamwork. I'm sorry? Connecting effectively. Wonderful. Perfect. Okay. Oh, okay. Yes. Togetherness, courage, action. Wow, I think we should go one by one. Who else wants to say something? Sorry? Empathy. Where would we be without compassion and empathy? Building relationships on compassion and empathy. Connecting effectively. Right. Anything else? Yes, sir. Listening. Wonderful. Teamwork. We're going to be here all day, folks. I think we're going to be here. You're going to have Misha has the last word. Solutions, yeah, let's not just talk about the problems and the issues, let's get our solutions in place as well. Let's have a round of applause for everybody. Okay. Our closing remarks are going to be delivered by Mohammed Hotak. Mohammed, please come to the stage while I introduce you. You're going to be up on the podium so everybody can see you. Mohammed is a trained medical doctor who served as Director General of Planning and Policy in his former country. He holds a master's degree in health administration and is doing lots of great work as a leader at Woodgreen agency here in the city of Toronto. Lots of passion and expertise around improving the lives of newcomers. Mohammed, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the closing remarks of the Faith Forum themed as Healing Together in Times of Crisis, Bridging Gaps, I'm filled with a profound sense of hope and inspiration. Today we have witnessed the strength of unity, the power of compassion, and the incredible potential that lies in our diverse faith communities coming together. In times of crisis, it's our shared humanity that becomes our greatest source of strength. The discussions we have had today highlight the resilience of our communities in the essential role that faith and compassion play in healing and rebuilding. We have seen that despite our differences, we all seek the same fundamental things: peace, understanding, and a better future for our community. The insights and experiences shared by our speakers have not only enlightened us, but have also equipped us with the tools to bridge gaps and foster unity. We have been reminded that healing is not a solitary journey, but a collective one. It requires us to reach out, support one another, and work together towards common goals. Moreover, the vital role of faith organizations in the integration of newcomers into Canadian society cannot be overstated. These organizations are pillars of support, providing guidance, resources, and a sense of belonging to those who are starting anew in a foreign land. They bridge cultural gaps and helps weave the rich tapestry of our multicultural nation. As we leave here today, let us carry forward the spirit of collaboration and mutual respect that has been so evident throughout this forum. Let us be ambassadors of peace and understanding in our communities. Let us continue to build bridges, not walls, and to seek common ground even in the most challenging of times. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to everyone who made this event possible, our speakers, organizers, especially Toronto North Lip, volunteers, and each one of you who participated. Your commitment to this cause is truly inspiring. In closing, let us remember that the journey towards healing and bridging gaps does not end here. It is an ongoing effort that requires our continuous dedication and actions. Together, we can create a future where crises bring us closer, where faith unites us, and where love and compassion prevail. Thank you, and may we all continue to be a beacon of hope and unity in our communities. Thank you for attending. Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, that brings us to our close. I want to say a big thank you to all of you. I had a super fun day myself. I don't know about you guys, but I'm really glad how it turned out. Please, round of applause for the whole day, how it shaped up. It was a delight to see many familiar faces. I met many new people, and I just want to say that I really want to encourage everybody. We heard lots of great words about collaboration and the learnings people had from the different workshops. One thing that stands out for me that I want to send you all home is continue. I saw it on the wall over there, so it's not original to me, but it resonates with me. It said, "Be brave." So collaboration is about bravery, and I want to encourage all of you to please be brave. Take courage every day in the work that you do. It's not easy. It's difficult. We're dealing with crisis matters, as Mohammed just said, but together we can be strong, and I want to encourage all of you to continue in the work that you're doing. Those of you who've been at it for decades know the work that can happen. There are peaks and valleys in this work with different issues going on internationally and locally. And those of you who are just starting out, I hope you're inspired by today's events and continue to build those relationships to work closer. So thank you very much for today, and have a great rest of the day.
I'll now call for the final words the project lead for the Faith Forum, who was the main organizer to pull all of this together. If you don't know her, her name is Asta, and she'll come to the stage now. Thank you.
Wow, I honestly don't even know what else to say because so many beautiful words have been shared today, but I just want to say thank you. This beautiful event is definitely not a one-man job. I had the honor of being the project lead, but I couldn't have done it without my amazing team at TN-LIP, the amazing planning committee, who was made up of the Interlip and community service providers as well. A big shout out to Jody, Rola, NK Ruka, Azreen, Aiza, Munir, Sylvie, and Imam Imran, Imam Patel, Mohammed, just everyone around the room. I can't thank you enough. And also a big thank you to the venue, Black Creek Pioneer Village. They did a fantastic job. So give a round of applause. They were beyond amazing. And then the also man of the hour is definitely our friend Dave from Hawkeye Films, who this event would not be possible without. You guys saw him running around, doing all the tech, and you know, working with Dave is always a pleasure. I highly recommend Hawkeye Films to everybody because they handle everything so smoothly. And a huge, huge thank you to our photographer as well, who's been taking some beautiful photos of everybody. So, you know, as you guys can see, I only have the utmost gratitude to all the planning committee, our speakers, our panelists, and everyone else in the room. And most of all, I have a big thank you to you guys, because this event is not possible without the attendees who come and they are vulnerable, they have courage, they are fearless, and they come with an open mind and an open heart to collaborate and share for one goal, which is to truly make the world a little bit of a better place. And that's why we all do the work that we do, and we move forward with love and kindness. So with that, I just want to say a big, big thank you to everyone, and then especially also to Michael. He was the best MC that we could have asked for as well. So thank you, Michael. We really could not have, you know, gone through the agenda without you. So thank you. And yeah, I've said thank you maybe a million times now because that's just how much gratitude I have in my heart for everybody. And with that, I just want to say Faith Forum is a first step. It's not the last by any means. I encourage you to push forward the boundaries. I encourage you to push forward these conversations, these networks, these connections, all to work towards the mutual goals that we have so that we can help newcomers settle with better livelihoods, and we can truly, truly live in a world where we are proud to be and where our children will be proud to be as well. So thank you guys so much, and I couldn't be more honored. Thank you. One last thing, which I was reminded of, if you guys have not already filled out the feedback form for our Faith Forum, please do scan this QR code and let us know how we can improve and make an even better event for you in the future. Thank you guys all.